this rap thing to the light. Right, rhymes all day, all night. You're bringing this rap thing to the light. Right, rhymes all day, on another level. Bringing this rap thing to the light. Right, rhymes all day, all night. You're bringing this rap thing to the light. On another level, there's none identical.
This is the sound of someone winning. My life force go hard, no dimming. Had to go through so much struggle before I really started living. Rap serenades, flow grenades, blow up barricades. Respect the craft, I'm custom made. So many people said I couldn't do it. Thought I'd die before 25. I proved us all wrong. It's in the music. I'm all-star radiance, walking in my purpose. Shout out to all the goddess queens I walk this earth with. And all my kings stand up, looking fly, smelling good while you walk real tough. To my brothers with the fresh beards all done up. And my shorty who gives me some whenever I wanna, yeah. It's pure attraction. When I put it down, I give it all my passion. Guaranteed satisfaction. I don't jump on nobody's wagon. Make the impossible possible. Talk with ease and spit the fire of a dragon.
Bringing this rap thing to the light. Right, rhymes all day, all night. You're bringing this rap thing to the light. Right, rhymes all day, on another level. Bringing this rap thing to the light. Right, rhymes all day, all night. You're bringing this rap thing to the light. On another level, so much more impeccable.
Nejma Nefertiti, I ain't your motherfucking sweetie. Close your mouth, you way too greedy. People steal on my shit, they needy. Then walk around talking greasy, thinking they're gonna defeat me. I know who my people are, believe me. This rap thing I make look easy. Respect my craft, it took years of practice to get this breezy. Yeah, you know my steezy. I don't want for much to please me. Food, water, shelter, once in a while a good cigar to ease me. Blowing on them treesies, thinking how far I've come. I'm so proud of myself, but there's still so much I wanna get done. Every day I'm closer to leaving a legacy I'm dreaming of. I got the spirit of a panther. Don't waste my time with petty banter. Talk real things. Always a student question before I answer. Eat food that kills cancer. Make music that will enhance you. Make your body move. What's a revolution without a dancer? Hip hop. 5 elements. The 5th one will advance you. 5 fingers to make a fist. Put it up in the air like this. Be the one they don't want to miss. I perfected my flow like this, and now it's sweeter than the first kiss. Right there where your thirst is. That real good kind of hurt shit. Real love, not just flirting. I'm for certain beyond a question or a doubt. Some will do anything for clout. That's not at all what I'm about. I'm a creator, motivator, hip-hop administrator. See you later. I'm too busy getting greater. No time for haters. Suckers are players. Fuckers are mayors. Betrayers, fake soothsayers. Get the fuck up out my hair. Taking up too much air. And your breath stink, I swear. I got that real wealth. I'm a self-made billionaire. You can't help it the way you stare. I got a different kind of flair. No one else could ever compare. I'm like that fine-ass cookware. The one and only edition. Master manifesto magician. I don't listen to the opposition. Can't stop my mission from reaching fruition. I earn my position. I'm my own politician. Watch me glisten, the rap arithmetician. The way I spit bars, I spit stars. Spit hellfire. If you say I don't, you a liar. I'm a survivor. I'm a thriver. 5 fingers to make a fist. Put it up in the air like this. I'm a thriver. DJ Scream. Nejma Nefertiti, hip hop. Bringing this rap thing to the light. Right, rhymes all day, all night. You're bringing this rap thing to the light. Right, rhymes all day, on another level. Bringing this rap thing to the light. Right, rhymes all day, all night. You're bringing this rap thing to the light. On another level, there's none identical. This is the sound of someone winning. My life force go hard, no dimming. Had to go through so much struggle before I really started living. Rap serenades, flow grenades, blow up barricades. Respect the craft, I'm custom made. So many people said I couldn't do it. Thought I'd die before 25. I proved us all wrong. It's in the music. I'm all-star radiance, walking in my purpose. Shout out to all the goddess queens I walk this earth with. And all my kings stand up, looking fly, smelling good while you walk real tough. To my brothers with the fresh beards all done up. And my shorty who gives me some whenever I wanna, yeah. It's pure attraction. When I put it down, I give it all my passion. Guaranteed satisfaction. I don't jump on nobody's wagon. Make the impossible possible. Talk with ease and spit the fire of a dragon. Bringing this rap thing to the light. Right, rhymes all day, all night. You're bringing this rap thing to the light. Right, rhymes all day, on another level. Bringing this rap thing to the light. Right, rhymes all day, all night. You're bringing this rap thing to the light. On another level, so so much more impeccable. Nejma Nefertiti, I ain't your motherfucking sweetie. Close your mouth, you way too greedy. People still on my shit, they needy. Then walk around talking greasy, thinking they're gonna defeat me. I know who my people are, believe me. This rap thing I make look easy. Respect my craft, it took years of practice to get this breezy. Yeah, you know my steezy. I don't want for much to please me. Food, water, shelter, once in a while a good cigar to ease me. Blowing on them treesies, thinking how far I've come. I'm so proud of myself, but there's still so much I wanna get done. Every day I'm closer to leaving a legacy I'm dreaming of. I got the spirit of a panther. Don't waste my time with petty banter. Talk real things, always a student question before I answer. Eat food that kills cancer, make music that will enhance you, make your body move. What's a revolution without a dancer? Hip hop, 5 elements, the 5th one will advance you. 5 fingers to make a fist, put it up in the air like this. Be the one they don't wanna miss. I perfected my flow like this, and now it's sweeter than the first kiss. Right there where your thirst is, that real good kind of hurt shit. Real love, not just flirting. I'm for certain, beyond a question or a doubt. Some will do anything for clout, that's not at all what I'm about. I'm a creator, motivator, hip-hop administrator, see you later. I'm too busy getting greater, no time for haters. Suckers or players, fuckers or mayors, betrayers, fake soothsayers. Get the fuck up out my hair, taking up too much air, and your breath stink, I swear. I got that real wealth, I'm a self-made billionaire. You can't help it the way you stare, I got a different kind of flair. No one else could ever compare. I'm like that fine-ass cookware, the one and only edition, master manifesto magician. I don't listen to the opposition, can't stop my mission from reaching fruition. I earn my position, I'm my own politician. Watch me glisten, the rap arithmetician. The way I spit bars, I spit stars, spit hellfire. If you say I don't, you a liar. I'm a survivor, I'm a thriver. 5 fingers to make a fist, put it up in the air like this. I'm a thriver. DJ Scream, Nejma Nefertiti, hip hop.
Bringing this rap thing to the light. Rhymes all day, all night. And bringing this rap thing to the light. Rhymes all day,
On another level.
bringing this rap thing to the light. Rhymes all day, all night. And bringing this rap thing to the light.
On another level, there's none identical. This is the sound of someone winning. My life force go hard, no dimming. Had to go through so much struggle before I really started living. Rap serenades, flow grenades, blow up barricades. Respect the craft, I'm custom made. So many people said I couldn't do it. Thought I'd die before 25. I proved us all wrong. It's in the music. I'm all-star radiance, walking in my purpose. Shout out to all the goddess queens I walk this earth with. And all my kings stand up, looking fly, smelling good while you walk real tough. To my brothers with the fresh beards all done up. And my shorty who gives me some whenever I wanna, yeah. It's pure attraction. When I put it down, I give it all my passion. Guaranteed satisfaction. I don't jump on nobody's wagon. Make the impossible possible. Talk with ease and spit the fire of a dragon.
Bringing this rap thing to the light. Rhymes all day, all night. And bringing this rap thing to the light. Rhymes all day,
On another level.
bringing this rap thing to the light. Rhymes all day, all night. And bringing this rap thing to the light.
On another level, so much more impeccable. Nejma Nefertiti, I ain't your motherfucking sweetie. Close your mouth, you way too greedy. People still on my shit, they needy. Then walk around talking greasy, thinking they're gonna defeat me. I know who my people are, believe me. This rap thing I make look easy. Respect my craft, it took years of practice to get this breezy. Yeah, you know my steezy. I don't want for much to please me. Food, water, shelter, once in a while a good cigar to ease me. Blowing on them treesies, thinking how far I've come. I'm so proud of myself, but there's still so much I wanna get done. Every day I'm closer to leaving a legacy I'm dreaming of. I got the spirit of a panther. Don't waste my time with petty banter. Talk real things, always a student question before I answer. Eat food that kills cancer, make music that will enhance you, make your body move. What's a revolution without a dancer? Hip hop, 5 elements, the 5th one will advance you. 5 fingers to make a fist, put it up in the air like this. Be the one they don't wanna miss. I perfected my flow like this, and now it's sweeter than the first kiss. Right there where your thirst is, that real good kind of hurt shit. Real love, not just flirting. I'm for certain, beyond a question or a doubt. Some will do anything for clout, that's not at all what I'm about. I'm a creator, motivator, hip-hop administrator, see you later. I'm too busy getting greater, no time for haters. Suckers or players, fuckers or mayors, betrayers, fake soothsayers. Get the fuck up out my hair, taking up too much air, and your breath stink, I swear. I got that real wealth, I'm a self-made billionaire. You can't help it the way you stare, I got a different kind of flair. No one else could ever compare. I'm like that fine-ass cookware, the one and only edition, master manifesto magician. I don't listen to the opposition, can't stop my mission from reaching fruition. I earn my position, I'm my own politician. Watch me glisten, the rap arithmetician. The way I spit bars, I spit stars, spit hellfire. If you say I don't, you a liar. I'm a survivor, I'm a thriver. 5 fingers to make a fist, put it up in the air like this. I'm a thriver. DJ Scream, Nejma Nefertiti, hip hop.
Bringing this rap thing to the light. Rhymes all day, all night. You're bringing this rap thing to the light. Rhymes all day, on another level. Bringing this rap thing to the light. Rhymes all day, all night. You're bringing this rap thing to the light. On another level, there's none identical.
This is the sound of someone winning. My life force go hard, no dimming. Had to go through so much struggle before I really started living. Rap serenades, flow grenades, blow up barricades. Respect the craft, I'm custom made. So many people said I couldn't do it. Thought I'd die before 25. I proved us all wrong. It's in the music. I'm all-star radiance, walking in my purpose. Shout out to all the goddess queens I walk this earth with. And all my kings stand up, looking fly, smelling good while you walk real tough. To my brothers with the fresh beards all done up. And my shorty who gives me some whenever I wanna, yeah. It's pure attraction. When I put it down, I give it all my passion. Guaranteed satisfaction. I don't jump on nobody's wagon. Make the impossible possible. Talk with ease and spit the fire of a dragon.
Bringing this rap thing to the light. Rhymes all day, all night. You're bringing this rap thing to the light. Rhymes all day, on another level. Bringing this rap thing to the light. Rhymes all day, all night. You're bringing this rap thing to the light. On another level, so much more impeccable.
Nejma Nefertiti, I ain't your motherfucking sweetie. Close your mouth, you way too greedy. People steal on my shit, they needy. Then walk around talking greasy, thinking they're gonna defeat me. I know who my people are, believe me. This rap thing I make look easy. Respect my craft, it took years of practice to get this breezy. Yeah, you know my steezy. I don't want for much to please me. Food, water, shelter, once in a while a good cigar to ease me. Blowing on them treesies, thinking how far I've come. I'm so proud of myself, but there's still so much I wanna get done. Every day I'm closer to leaving a legacy I'm dreaming of. I got the spirit of a panther. Don't waste my time with petty banter. Talk real things. Always a student question before I answer. Eat food that kills cancer. Make music that will enhance you. Make your body move. What's a revolution without a dancer? Hip hop. 5 elements. The 5th one will advance you. 5 fingers to make a fist. Put it up in the air like this. Be the one they don't want to miss. I perfected my flow like this, and now it's sweeter than the first kiss. Right there where your thirst is. That real good kind of hurt shit. Real love, not just flirting. I'm for certain beyond a question or a doubt. Some will do anything for clout. That's not at all what I'm about. I'm a creator, motivator, hip-hop administrator. See you later. I'm too busy getting greater. No time for haters. Suckers are players. Fuckers are mayors. Betrayers. Fake soothsayers. Get the fuck up out my hair. You taking up too much air. And your breath stink, I swear. I got that real wealth. I'm a self-made billionaire. You can't help it the way you stare. I got a different kind of flair. No one else could ever compare. I'm like that fine-ass cookware. The one and only edition. Master manifesto magician. I don't listen to the opposition. Can't stop my mission from reaching fruition. I earn my position. I'm my own politician. Watch me glisten, the rap arithmetician. The way I spit bars, I spit stars, spit hellfire. If you say I don't, you a liar. I'm a survivor, I'm a thriver. 5 fingers to make a fist. Put it up in the air like this. I'm a thriver. DJ Scream, Nejma Nefertiti, hip hop.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. This is Firoze Manji, working with People Strike. This is July the 1st, and this will be a strike and broadcast every month in 2020. So I'd like to welcome you all to the show today. We will be broadcasting on People Strike page on Facebook, but also on YouTube. You can see the link to the YouTube down below. Okay, well, let's get the show on the road, and remove this image from my face so they can see who I am. And let me introduce our first guest, who is going to introduce the show uh, today. Um, let me bring Rose Brewer in. Welcome, Rose. Nice to see you again. We begin the day with comrade and sister Rose Brewer, who will who will introduce today's program. And well, I suspect most of you know Rose. She's a fighter in the struggle for socialism, for justice, an activist scholar of Black Studies, and a member of the Black Caucus People's Strike. Welcome, Rose. Thanks for starting us off.
Thank you, Firoze. It's good to be here. For me, it's morning, early morning. Thanks to all of you who joined us at the start of our programming. I want to say a few words, setting a bit of context about where we are and why we are. In the 2 months since the launch of People's Strike, multiple crises are clearer than ever. A global pandemic which shut the US down continues to rage, even as politicians argue over the optics of wearing masks. A healthcare system in tatters is unable to meet the exigencies of pandemic, and even under the best of circumstances, fails to provide adequate healing and access to care. A ravaged economy in which 50 million people in the US and billions globally are unemployed, homeless, face the prospect of joblessness and hunger. Militarized police forces that look away during outbreaks of right-wing violence, but take the lead when it comes to repressing Black communities, leadership, or individual Black lives. But two resistant realities are also clear. United grassroots efforts at workers' solidarity and mutual aid have in some places stemmed the tide of the virus. And in the streets, an unprecedented diversity of ages, ethnicities, genders, and ideologies have come together, causing a new consciousness and conversation about abolishing police, which serve to uphold oppression, abolishing class systems, which institutionalize injustice, abolishing an empire which reinvents colonial mentality in ever sector, ever region, and ever unfree mind. Today, we will hear from voices as each of these speak to the aspects of resistance. We are, in short, in a moment of great urgency and possibility. We must rise up in a way that has not been done before, rise up consistently and with the deepest of commitment. This rise up centers in asserting Black humanity in all its complexity, in asserting all of our humanity, but also in the many forms of dispossession across genders, ethnicities, sexualities, nationalities, interlinked. It is a righteous moment as another generation stands in the ready in opposition to everything this country has propagated: racism, white supremacy, imperialism, heteropatriarchy, extractivist capitalism. Crucial to building a transnational movement in the US and across the globe is generating a deep understanding and practice of the current political moment. Theory and practice, praxis to win. We know that state violence is built into the very fiber of US society, from its inception in the genocide of indigenous peoples and the brutal genocidal and forced enslavement of Africans. State violence is deeply intertwined with the protection of private property, profit, and the ongoing contemporary expression of police violence, mass incarceration, war, and militarism. Structural racism remains deeply embedded with transnational capital. As the disposability of Black lives becomes ever more visible in the everyday operation of the society, we know state violence will intensify. When elite self-interest and social interest are so aligned with racialized economic dispossession, this is intractable ground, requiring political opposition. When institutionalized practices are so resistant to change, state violence and police killings as expressions of this reality are part and parcel of the very fiber, warmth, and sinews of the everyday world, the normalized, taken for granted world. In this system, the demand and struggle for radical change are imperative. 21st century racism means holding in check or removing a population of people who are deemed a threat to the status quo or excess. It means the state violence of COVID-19 disproportionately taking the lives of tens of thousands, millions across the world of Black, brown, indigenous peoples. When communities become dumping grounds for guns that are not made there, drugs that are imported, and locked out of opportunities to education, employment struggle must be for creating a new society. The system will not transform itself. This must come from us, forcing change. Our work is cut out. What must be built is tough, robust movements aligning multiple complexities. At the center of the rise up are the courageous, the forgotten, those who are most deeply impacted by police murder, economic, political, and social dispossession. But the stars are aligning. In this period of the Floyd Rebellion, people in 1,000 places have said no more to police killings and deeply rooted structural injustice, the voraciousness of racial capitalism. So the old and the new must move forward in deep interconnectivity through vision, strategy, and consciousness. As the great African revolutionary Amilcar Cabral asserted, we must mask no difficulties, tell no lies, claim no easy victory. I would say we must build the tough, hard revolutionary road. And in this context, our broadcast today includes Black farmers, land right activists, and environmentalists determined to create a commons in the face of Black environmental vulnerability, featuring J.T. Roane. Organizers and activists from Jackson, Mississippi, Louisville, Kentucky, Seattle, Washington, New York City, New York, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Charlotte, North Carolina, and Tappahannock, Virginia, all speak in their reports to the issues and will provide us with an update of uprisings around the U.S. This will be hosted by Firoze, Manji, and Holden Cession. Clarence Thomas, ILWU leader, retired, will discuss that unprecedented ILWU work stoppage at West Coast ports on Juneteenth, hosted by Saki Hall. Footage and discussion of the recent New York City Black and Brown Unite and Fight rally with scholar activist Joanna Fernandez and Young Lord founder Mickey Melendez, hosted by Matt Meyer and Wendy Marshall. Global solidarity with Black liberation uprisings in the U.S., including guests from Brazil, Palestine, China, India, the UK, and Canada, hosted by Frida Afari. Updates of the COVID pandemic and analysis of the origins of the deadly virus, hosted by Firoze Manji. And finally, a summation by Kali Akuno of Cooperation Jackson. We are also broadcasting music by Immortal Technique, Dave Lipman, and others, as well as poetry from Black Agenda Reports, Raymond Nat Turner. The broadcast is streaming live on YouTube. So welcome to the People Strike, June 1st broadcast.
Wow. Wow. What an extraordinary presentation. Rose, I appreciate you getting up so early in the morning. I hadn't realized that you were way over on the other side.
I am.
That's great. I really appreciated the way that you brought also the words of Amilcar Cabral, claim no easy victories. I think that's a very, very fundamental issue. It is transparency, honesty, integrity that will get us through. One of the things that Cabral was known for was to build tomorrow's society today. It's not something that just we dream of, but to create it in the conditions in which we live. How do you see that emerging today across the United States?
Oh, it's an amazing expression of the lens folk are bringing to this very powerful moment. The idea that we collectively build our needs, sometimes the idea that we are, and in many instances, we are building that society we want in the present moment. Mutual aid is everywhere. But mutual aid in my tradition is something that has always kept us together and thriving and possible. I'm a child of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I know that I've been in the news recently. I was born and raised there. And without the solidarity and collectivity of that community in the wake of that horrific history, because it didn't stop by the time that I came on the scene, the community had to pull together. And I think those traditions, those ancestral practices, as well as recognizing that we are in a new political and social moment, that the aid is a part of a longer term revolutionary road that has to be built. And if we keep that in our vision, we are on our way to the kind of society that we also want and desire. So yes, it's an amazing aspect of the current political moment.
But we're faced also, Rose, with a devastating impact of the COVID pandemic, hitting in particular Black and brown people, indigenous people, people who are the most exposed to being the essential workers in our hospitals and cleaning up, services, and so on. How do you see this pandemic affecting this desire to create this new world, to create the solidarity economies?
One thing that's very apparent is for those of us who've been in the struggle for a minute, it's always been very clear that underneath that which isn't always so evident was really the motor of this society, often care work, women's labor, socially reproductive labor. And in the context of COVID-19, that filter, that invisibility has been rendered visible. And it is quite true in terms of our consciousness to recognize what some are calling essential workers. These are the people who have always made this society possible, who have always cared for those who can't find care under the social order. But you're quite right. This is no joke. This is quite serious. And the hands off, the lack of attentiveness, the kind of pharmaceutical and healthcare system that is built on profit, that denies access to so many of those who are disproportionately impacted by COVID makes it a crisis moment, a disastrous moment. I've lost dear ones to this virus, and we know that as we speak, thousands more are being impacted, and many will die. So the intertwining of these multiple crises of racism, of profit and violence, and the disposability of human beings in what we could call an unnatural way, a premature way. These issues, these multiple crises, must be a part of the vision that we take to transform and to build and to make a world for the people and the planet.
I'd like to bring in another great fighter, long-standing militant and intellectual, dear friend, Wendy Marshall. Wendy, some questions, some comments from you to this amazing presentation that we've had.
Morning, Rose.
Good morning, Conrad.
What are our prospects for victory?
Well, we better make it. It's up to us. We better make it. That's not to downplay what we're up against. This is the most militarized, warmongering nation on the face of the earth. Those weapons have been turned outward, but I've been in the heart of the uprising and have seen firsthand how they can be turned inward. Rubber bullets are no joke, real firearm, no joke. And to call into, to call in to join us in this response, this horrible response to people's righteous right to rise up through that white supremacist trope is also a danger. So the weaponry, the coloniality that I spoke to earlier in the minds of those people who, in many instances, in the majority of instances, are not benefiting. How we build and organize, and Wendy is a incredible organizer, putting organizing at the center. The marches certainly are great and powerful, but developing a strategic direction, developing a deep sense of how we're going to move in coalescence with one another. I suspect, and I know deeply, that those will be that will be the route to our victory.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rose.
Thank you, Wendy.
No.
Should I leave, or how do you want me to do this?
Firoze is in charge.
Okay, so we're moving to the next segment, right?
Yeah, I think so. Firoze,
Okay.
guidance, please.
We'll move to the next segment in a moment, but first to say really thank you so much for launching today with I think an important reflection on the current conditions. And I know already that lots of people are liking this, watching this, and I think it is something that perhaps that text that you produce can be made available widely. I think it's important for us to reflect on the complexities that you've helped us knit together and understand the warp and the woof of these struggles.
And I would also shout out to my sister Conrad, Wendy, who crafted the pieces around the programming today. And I just folded in some of my observations. So in that sense, thank you, Wendy.
And thank you, Matt Meyer, who also contributed.
Well, I didn't know Matt. Thank you, Matt, too.
Yeah, so we have a really interesting day coming up. So I want to thank you for joining us, Rose and Wendy. We will now go on to a pre-recorded, broadcast, which I'll introduce in a moment.
Thank
And
you
we'll
so
see
much.
We'll see Rose later on Uprisings update from
Indeed,
Minneapolis.
indeed.
Thanks, everybody. This is going to
Okay.
be an incredible day. Thank you, Firoze.
Go well.
Thank you, Rose.
Thank you.
Wow. Well, that's a great way to start the day. What we are going to be doing in a moment is showing a video which has been prepared by J.T. Roane, which looks at Black farmers and Black ecologies. I think an area that I think is often given insufficient attention. So if you'll be patient with me in just a moment, I will get this up and running on StreamYard. And here we go. I gather there's been a problem with the sound. I'm going to try and sort this out. If you just hang on a moment. Just want to check. For some reason, things sound is not coming through. Wendy, can you check whether you can hear? You were able to hear, or is it still still? Okay. The sound isn't on. Oh dear. Can you just confirm, Wendy? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. All right. So it's the streaming of this sound. Roane.
Environmental politics PhD in African American Studies, and also the board chair of the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network. So since at least 1987, the UCC's Commission for Racial Justice Study of Toxic Waste and Race in the US, it's been clear that Black and Latinx communities, in particular Indigenous communities as well, are the victims of the disproportionate siting of toxic waste. Can you tell us a bit more about that situation in North Carolina?
Sure. So there is some dispute about this, but there are a lot of accounts that cite North Carolina as the birthplace of the environmental justice movement, or what is now known as the environmental justice movement. There have been multiple, I would say, environmental justice type movements in the United States across and globally across history. But yeah, and that actually started in Warren County, North Carolina, in a Black community, not unlike some of the Black communities that are the focus of my research, with the siting of a toxic waste landfill. And what really happened there back in the early 80s was that civil rights organizers mobilized really highly visible protests and sit-ins and sort of die-ins, if you will, in opposition to that landfill, which was cited anyway, and they spent probably the next almost 30 years trying to get rid of that landfill and to get some sort of compensation for the harm that was done from it. And that really, within North Carolina, has sparked a number of, mobilizations over the last 30, 40 plus years at this point, which have kind of intersected with every kind of waste imaginable. So one of the most high profile forms of toxic waste that people know North Carolina for is hog waste. In Eastern North Carolina, we have what's called concentrated animal feed operations, where they pack thousands and thousands of hogs in to really confined corridors, where they where there's just a high propensity for illness. Their waste is collected in these what they call waste lagoons, and that waste is sprayed onto spray fields that purportedly as fertilizer, and it's essentially a way to get rid of the waste and to avoid the kinds of regulations that happen when big storms come and those lagoons overflow. But the consequence for the predominantly Black communities that live near that is that they are being sprayed with hog feces on a pretty regular basis. It's a really horrendous, nightmare, sort of out of a nightmare. And it's just not only, extraordinarily hazardous to their health, but they also just their enjoyment of their lives in their communities, right? You can't have your family reunions in the summer. You can't do cooking out. You can't hang your clothes on the line. You can't plant your kitchen garden. All of those really, those activities that Black communities in particular are really known for across history are really precluded in a lot of ways by this industry.
What are folks in North Carolina, what are you doing in your work to combat all of that, to work against it?
Yeah, so the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network has been around since around 1998, 1999. And it started really in response to a couple of things. So the first thing was just the hog industry, right? So the hog industry really came, as we know it now, really came to power, I would say, in the 1980s, and has sort of reached a kind of pivotal moment, like a peak of its sort of proliferation of these just mass, basically hog death sites and waste sites by the late 90s. And there was a lot of mobilization around that. And there was a necessity from folks who were impacted. So East Warren County, right, where this first, right, like the, so-called birthplace of the environmental justice movement, is the same place where, you see a lot of these hog farms, right? So these are overlapping geographies. And so some of the same people who were involved in that struggle got involved in struggle around the hog industry. That also coincided with Hurricane Floyd in 1999, which breached multiple of these hog waste lagoons. And what it meant was that there was just rivers of hog waste, right? Like mixed in with the floodwaters. And also just thousands and thousands and thousands of hogs drowned in this moment, along with people and their homes and all of this. So it was they talk about this in during Hurricane Katrina as this sort of like toxic soup, right? This was another version of this in North Carolina, 6 years before Katrina. And yeah, so the network really founded itself as kind of in the aftermath of that disaster to try to organize or work with communities to organize themselves against multiple of these types of industries. So the hog industry remains sort of our nemesis number one, although it has been, it's been restricted in ways that it's not as huge, right, and powerful as it used to be. But it's been supplanted by, you mentioned the poultry industry. There are poultry CAFOs that are now proliferating all over North Carolina, and they're very difficult to monitor because the industries got smart and worked with legislators to not have that industry permitted, right, or monitored as closely. So it's very hard to even know how many there are and where they are. But we know that there are a lot of them in the same areas where the hog facilities are. So yeah, it's just sort of the work just really evolved from there.
Hello, my name is Alexis Young, and today we will be discussing environmental vulnerabilities in Black ecologies with sociocultural anthropologist and Emory professor, Dr. Justin Hurlstein. Thank you so much for speaking with me. Can you tell our listeners about your work in relation to Black environmental vulnerability, starting with what drew you to the work?
Yes, actually. It goes back quite a bit for me, and I think that I became really concerned about environmental justice and environmental racism earlier than I even knew what the term meant, because kind of what's propelled me in my academic career so far really has been my experience as an undergraduate when Hurricane Katrina happened. And I think that Hurricane Katrina, when that happened, I was a sophomore in college. And I think that was the first time where I really saw with my own eyes as an adult the abandonment of the state in the face of ecological catastrophe for Black people. And I saw the ways in which Black people were being framed and the aftermath of what happened in their desperation to kind of stay alive, and how that became criminalized, and how in many ways, Black people were actually allowed to die in New Orleans post-Katrina, and that kind of like the afterlife of that event still continues to this day. So for me, it went back to that moment as an undergraduate. And then as I became, went to graduate school, my research is based in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I initially went to New Orleans, Louisiana because I wanted to investigate how the school system became privatized after Hurricane Katrina. Because not only did that cause a great ecological catastrophe to the city of New Orleans as well, it kind of radically shifted social policy as well. So in the aftermath of Katrina, they privatized the entire school system into all charter schools. It's been that way since the mid 2000s. So now every public school. So I initially went to New Orleans just to understand how that happened, how Black parents of different class backgrounds understood and navigated that system. But when I got there and lived in New Orleans, I realized that this is a city and a geography on the brink of environmental catastrophe in many different ways, from the environmental racism to the pollution in southern Louisiana, Cancer Alley that goes throughout southern Louisiana as well, and also the effects of offshore drilling on the coastline of Louisiana. So I realized that New Orleans was really, when I was thinking about Katrina as a moment, that was just one moment in a long trajectory of kind of environmental racism that kind of exists in New Orleans. And I think that's how my work initially became I really began to think through how does environmental justice and environmental racism intersect with the issue of how schools became privatized post-Katrina, and also how Black life itself became criminalized, became in many ways warehoused, in many ways kind of, criminalized and stored within prisons and schools. So I think in my research now, I'm working through that connection between the carceral state, school privatization, and also how the sort of climate, this catastrophe makes all of those things even more, I guess you would say, even more deadly.
So in what ways have Black communities fought back against the challenges in proximity to the environmental degradation?
Yes, absolutely. In so many multivariate, multifaceted ways, from direct political activism within the city of New Orleans, to our creative expression and Black expressive culture critiquing what happened after Hurricane Katrina, what happened to New Orleans post Katrina, to more insurgent modes of kind of Black revolutionary, Black nationalist ways of thinking through how we then create a livable environment for us within this place. So I think in many ways it's a multifaceted battle. It's a political struggle, an economic struggle, and I think that in many ways it's the spirit of the insurgency of the Haitian Revolution. In many ways, I think is propelling lots of activists now in New Orleans to think about how do we kind of tap into our historical legacy, the historical legacy of Black insurgency in Louisiana, and use that to propel us into a new future in the present. And we're seeing that now with the taking down NOLA movement, where they're taking down Confederate monuments, which I think in this current moment now where there's so much will towards, yes, take down the monuments, they're bad. This has been going on in New Orleans for the past 4 or 5 years. Want to get Andrew Jackson down, want to get Robert E. Lee down. So I think that, Black New Orleanians kind of their activism of the past few years since Katrina is really preempting, in many ways predicting what we're seeing on a more massive scale across the United States and the world.
So how have those insurgent modes of citizenship shifted from slavery till now?
Yes. Well, I think, at the time of, racial slavery, Black people were not only non-citizens, they were in many ways anti-citizens because they kind of defined the borders of what citizenship was and how citizenship was regulated in the United States during slavery. So in that transition, of course, during slavery, there was slave rebellion. You have the German Coast revolts. You have Juan Malo. You have so many different. You have a historical kind of insurgency amongst people who were enslaved. And then you have, of course, going toward the early 20th century, you have the UNIA, Marcus Garvey, and the United Way Improvement Association. You have Clean Mother Moore. And you have this kind of, in New Orleans, this rapid insurgency about, okay, how do we then either create some space of marinage, create our own state, or how do we have a nation within what's happening here? So you have the UNIA movement, and then, of course, you have in the contemporary moment, you have, the Black Panther Party. You always have had, I think that in many ways, Black New Orleans had that spirit of radical insurgency. And I think that part of what I do in my research is show that the long legacy of that still exists and people are still fighting, because I think that in New Orleans, the reality of slavery never having ended has always been clear. I think in other locations, people kind of said, no, we're not really in a condition of slavery anymore. I think in New Orleans, people understood, no, being in that city right there, in that geography, they know no, slavery never ended, and we're still fighting for emancipation and full emancipation. And I realized that in my own research, the kind of the fight for educational rights for Black children is a part of that struggle and that insurgency.
So do you think that fighting for those educational rights is a part of a way of seeing a future beyond the ecocide and the social violence?
Absolutely. And I think that, any kind of any movement in the American South that's going to really address and attempt to redress environmental racism, it has to be Black-led in the U.S. South. It has to be. And I think that in New Orleans, we're seeing models of leadership, different kinds of models of leadership emerging in the city and around the city, and inspired by the city as well, to think about how do we live in the city on the brink of ecological catastrophe in a way that is livable, in a way that is sustainable, so that New Orleans can exist 100 years from now. And I think that especially become the Black feminist organizing that's happening in New Orleans, that's always been a central part of their praxis. You know, how do we think through a sustainable way to live? Because I think that for many activists, they understand that this is a plantation geography. This is a geography designed to extract, to exploit, to destroy. And they're saying, how do we totally rethink our modes of citizenship, our modes of housing, our modes, how do we live sustainably here in a way that will allow New Orleans to exist 100 years from now?
The southeast of Puerto Rico is a coast that was essentially a plantation coast. So it was a sugar plantation coastal zone. And this is where I've been doing my work for the last 2 decades. And from the beginning, because so it's also, you write an ancestral kind of search. My own family is from this coast. My mother's people are Afro-Puerto Rican, Black Puerto Ricans, who themselves worked in the plantations in different modalities. So mostly cutting sugarcane seasonally, and the woman assisting, right, in the periphery of the plantation after emancipation. So before they had also likely, we don't know because the record is so fragmented. There's hardly, it's very difficult to find the record for enslaved. At least it has been for me. And so I imagine that many of my female ancestors were also cutting cane, but in post-emancipation, they basically assisted peripherally, sometimes in the cleaning and cooking for wealthy families for the most part. The town emerges out of the mountain and goes straight into the Caribbean Sea. And in that mountain is where I did my early work. And actually, this is a mountain of Black Puerto Ricans, right? And so they identify themselves as Black jibaros or Black peasants, right? And so the conception has been that Black peasants don't exist in Puerto Rico, which is odd given that they were brought, in fact, that one could argue that the peasantry has been in fact Black historically because they were the ones tending the plantations, right? And also because they're the ones who had, a great deal of knowledge about the ecosystem, and they developed a great deal of knowledge of the ecosystem through time. So, my early work dealt with peasants in this mountain town called Jaurel. It's a mountain neighborhood in the town where my family is from. So this is actually where my mother grew up. And one of the things is interesting, right? Because one of the things about family and the kind of doing the kind of family, I would say like archaeology to some degree, right? Had to do with me growing up in a house in which my own mother is a cook of traditional Black Puerto Rican foods. And so I grew up around, this food tradition in my household, which is, came out of essentially, right, the food, because we were extremely poor. A lot of the food we were eating was coming from foraging, right, in the ecosystem, right, in the backyard, and also from exchanging. My mother would exchange favors and gifts with neighbors, and a lot of the exchanges were actually food, right? So we would get, root vegetables and all kinds of grains and herbs, of course, and a lot of seafood, because we are, right, this mountain in which my mother grew up, goes down into a flat plain, which leads to the Caribbean Sea. So it's a rural coast, and it's a fishing village. It's very fertile. region, the southeast of Puerto Rico. So a lot of the food was also fish, right? So we would have lobster, we would have fish, and all of this stuff that my mother's neighbors and friends and God, she has a bunch of godsons and daughters, and they would all, some of them were fishermen and fishers, and they would bring food to my mother as gifts. And so I kind of begin, it's funny, I was enmeshed in it, so I wasn't thinking about it intellectually. But when I did pursue an intellectual project as an adult, it just naturally, my interest naturally flowed towards the rural coast and the kinds of lives people live there. And so the other kind of reason, the other reason that I led me to this kind of rural coast and trying to understand the ecosystem also had to do with the erasures, so of blackness, right? And also, erasures of actual people, like physical people. So like the erasure of my mother's mother from the entire landscape, right? She lived, she died, we don't know where she was buried. My mother doesn't know.
You mentioned the complex ways or the kind of really beautiful ways that your own mother was enmeshed or is enmeshed in these kinds of basically mutual aid networks. Could you talk more about what that looks like? Mainly because I think, as we face environmental catastrophe, I think those kinds of details and histories are going to have to be more censored because it's clear that the state is not coming to save us, right? So I guess, could you give us a little more of the texture of what that looks like on the ground in Puerto Rico?
And that's exactly right. I think too, for a long time, people such as my family, right, dispossessed Black people have known and have lived without the state, right? Essentially, the state has never really been a benefactor, and in fact, in my work, I argue that the state has been an oppressor. In the way in which it has, policed and surveilled and sort of, as Sargilla Harman talks about, right? Only thought about our lives in relation to it being a social problem, right? And so that's one piece. But in terms of because of the absence of the state, but also because we lived, as dispossessed, it's interesting. Dispossessed people close to the land, right, and the water. There is these ways in which my mother, but also, the people in the region, especially people my mother's age. So, we're talking about, but even people my age, people throughout this region engage in kind of mutual aid and solidarity networks that are regional, but also go beyond the region. So they're transnational too, right? And I can talk about how migration kind of also reshapes those networks, right, in the north for us, for many Puerto Ricans who migrated north. But the way in which these networks work, right, in the case of my mother, specifically, and some of her kin women, is that there is a way in which favors. So this isn't a world built around money, and it's not or the accruing of wealth or money, but it's built around the accruing of trust and care, right? And being there. So care, right? Being there for each other when the times, right? When it is needed. So for one quick example, in terms of my own family, is that we never owned land, and we never owned. My mother had never owned land or had never owned a house, so she's always rented her homes, her apartments, and but that has never stopped her from building and opening the doors, right, to a plethora of people in times of need, right? So being owning land is helpful, or owning your home is helpful, but it isn't the precondition for engaging in mutual aid and solidarity. And so in her case, right, she's always cooked, for people, for not only her family, but the extended family and friends. She's taking care of children for the family and extended family. And all of this has earned her, right, the ability then to say, I need food, or I'm traveling. And my mother has been a migrant now, a diaspora person for over 30 years, right? So my mother lives in the United States. But when my mother travels to her hometown, she knows that she's going to get back a shipment of fish and crabs to bring back, as well as root vegetables, right? So she will not leave that town without a nice large portion of fish, sometimes lobster, crabs, peppers, and vegetables that she brings back to cook to the family here in the north, right? And so these moments of her traveling to the islands, right, and spending however long she's there, it could be a month, it could be 3 weeks, but she comes back with all of this food, which she then makes a big feast of and invites everybody.
So I study the history of Black Appalachian activism, mainly what Black Appalachians thought, experienced, and did in response to racism, discrimination, violence, and environmental vulnerability in the 1960s and 70s. So during the Civil Rights Movement and the Black Power era. And I study an organization called the Black Appalachian Commission and its efforts to build a regional solidarity between Black people across 13 states. So they tried to form a regional Black consciousness and a regional solidarity in order to build power. So to bring Black people in rural spaces, and urban spaces together to forge collective power. So environmental vulnerability was a part of a larger constellation of injustices they challenged in the region. So thinking about Black ecologies, how Black people use space, but also the spaces that are allocated. In winter of 1972, in Harlan County, Kentucky, a landslide destroyed a Black community of homes on St. Park Hill. City, state, and federal agencies explained it as a natural disaster. The rain came and it washed the homes away. There's nothing they could do, they said. But when I went to the archives and I read about what the Black residents said, and I contacted some of them and sat with them to do oral history interviews, I learned that there was much more to the story, that before the slide, there's been decades of neglect on the part of the city, with building roads, putting in services, street lights, building ditches so that rain could drain. But also that there was this whole history of coal mining in the area that probably exacerbated their position on the hillside. With some people even suggesting that there were old coal mines still burning nearby. So when they lost their homes, they didn't take rain and there's nothing we can do as the answer. They kept pushing and they organized. So I think the main way I've learned from them that they fought back was that they formed committees, they outlined strategies, they composed demands, and they followed through. So in the case of Sanctified Hill, it took about 6 years before the homes that they owned that were destroyed were replaced. So I think the main way they fought back was to organize and continue speaking truth to power. They used the media, they used newspapers. Maddie Guy Knight, who was elected chairman of the committee for the Sanctified Hill residents, she boldly kept speaking truth to the governors, calling out city officials, saying like, I hear you talking, I don't see you acting. So I think that their activism and their ability to build this collective power, and led by Black women, a Black woman, women, men, people from inside the region and outside of the region, that they were able to challenge the injustice. Well, they traveled. One of the things they got to do with the help of the Black Appalachian Commission, which is actually when the BAC got there, and that's the organization I studied, they asked the community, what would you like to do? Which I think is so important. And, I'm studying their strategies for empowering communities. And they went to listen first and foremost. And the community said, we want to go to Washington and hold a press conference. So here is this very small community in Harlan County, Kentucky. And they say, well, we're not getting the attention and help that we need here in the state and in the city. So let's take this to Washington. And so they held a press conference there, and Maddie Knight spoke out. And one of the things she said is that, we're disaster victims, and we're being treated like we're not even citizens of this country, like we don't pay taxes. So it was a way for them to call out the federal agencies, the state agencies, and also in some ways to call out their home places for not doing anything. So much inaction that they had to take this all the way to Washington to get somebody to help. And I think that they did that. They had a meeting with the agency and started to begin the conversation of how to repair this. But again, it took time. It took them constantly speaking out in the paper and saying, here it is 2 years later, we still don't have homes. Or here it is a year later, and they're charging us rent in this place that's supposed to be emergency housing. Why are we being charged rent when, we owned our homes? Why are you trying to profit from this disaster and how it's affected us?
Mm-hmm.
I think
that sounds a little familiar with regards to Flint. Like that's the first thing off the top of my head. That sounds a lot like Flint, Michigan. So
exactly. And I don't speak out when this disaster happens, and then all of a sudden you get folks trying to come in and say, well, how can they capitalize on it? And they kept calling that out, and they're saying, okay, we see this developer coming in, but why isn't anyone doing a study on our behalf to tell us, the value of the property we lost?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Like it's tragic that I think the same work is having to be done. Like, what is it, 50 years now in the future? But hopefully, like using stories like that, people can go forward, using the methods that we use back then to kind of keep attention on spotlights down, like going back to Flint, like Marika Penny, Little Miss Flint, has been doing work since she was tiny.
During the 6-year battle, when the Census 5 Hill residents were fighting to have their homes replaced, once they did have the new community, which they named Pride Terrace, there was some community space within that. So they got their individual homes, but they also had community space, which they owned, I think, collectively, but also that they said, we will decide as a community what happens in this community space. And so I think that key to how we can think about futures is living collaboratively, owning land collaboratively, cooperatively, but also sitting in the seats that decide what's going to happen with that land, what's going to happen in the community.
Mm-hmm.
There's a seed of something very important where they rebuilt this new community, but they also said, in this common space, only the residents of Pride Terrace can say what happens here, not the city, but we decide. And I think in that lies this long tradition, I think, that Black communities have of working cooperatively, forming cooperatives, living not just in this sort of traditional nuclear family model, but with extended families, extended communities, and sharing ownership. But also not an ownership that just places property as the pinnacle, but how can we live cooperatively with this land? How can we live with this land? How can we be in a collective with land too? And I think that kind of stewardship, that kind of care is something that Black communities have always engaged in. But as we've lost land over the years, over the decades, we haven't been able to do that as much. The cooperative work, cooperative land ownership, and also getting in positions locally, whether that's on city councils, where we can make those decisions. A lot like what Jackson Mississippi did with Operation Jackson. So I think the more that Black communities can come together to force the solidarity, like they tried to do in Appalachia, like they're still doing in Appalachia, so that if you have a small community, Black community in a holler in Kentucky, and another Black community in Nashville, if they can pool resources, economic resources, intellectual resources, and say, okay, here's how we can build power. Here's how we can meet on the regular. Here's how we can think about purchasing some land so we can meet and have autonomy on that land. So I think those conversations are happening then, and I think even more so now. I work with this project called Blacks in Appalachia out of East Tennessee CBS, and we're talking about trying to bring back an annual meeting with Black Appalachians. Made up of academic activists, working folks, everybody, to talk about how to build power in the region. So my work is very much also connected to that kind of activism.
Yeah, I'm Demetrius Hunter, born and raised in Raleigh, North Carolina, for the Southeast Raleigh vicinity emerging, which has a program called Groceries on Wheels.
The Groceries on Wheels has a lot of youth involvement. So, what does the youth participation and contribution look like?
Well, for me, I was, I guess, the first young person to work there, and I started including my friends who would help go to the shop, would clean boxes, and also put produce in them and deliver them to people in our local communities. And it was really fun. And since luckily we all have our license, we're able to drive around and deliver produce to people and put a smile on their face. And so it's really fun, and I enjoy doing it.
And so how often do you all do that?
Monday to Thursday, every week.
Okay.
And then we also help out with the Black Farmers Market that happens before Sunday, once a month. Yes.
Nice. So I guess this is a question for you and for Mr. Demetrius. But given COVID-19 and the struggle against police violence, how has Groceries on Wheels responded, and how does Groceries on Wheels see the best way to move forward?
For me, Groceries on Wheels has always stayed true to what we do, and that is to provide healthy foods in our community. But one of the things that ignited or fueled what we could do is basically gather the youth and keep everything in the community. That's the first and foremost. We've always stuck to that, trying to keep everything in the community. That's our number one goal. As far as economics, as far as our young people, getting them out, creating jobs, everything that we can do for ourselves, we want to do that. That is kind of like what Malcolm X did for the community, basically, to try to make sure that we could do what for ourselves. So we want to continue that initiative and ensure that where the funding should be, I know that the funding is so important, but the funding that we should do is for our community. And even the budget for the police department, they have their budget. It should be defunded, but I believe that our goal is to make sure that we fund our people, our community, and strive to make sure that where the funds go, it should go back into the community. Well, with our work, there's people that are in need of food always. That is a definite essential part of life. So people can contribute to that. Funding for our land. People can create their own plot on the land, or they can help us build and create this development where we can continue to grow for our own community and put back into the community jobs and also healthy produce. So if they want to fund, they can call us or email us at goldtro@gmail.com.
My name is Watson, Jamaican-born artist. Spent a considerable amount of time living and growing in New York. Was based in Philadelphia, also for the arts, and then I've since recently moved to the Sun Valley in Arizona. So my work primarily deals with the visual arts and thinking through particular theories and methodologies as it relates to various cultural practices. Just as much as we watch and listen to each other, and really I started to think about bees and plants in community with each other. I really started to grow a sense that there are particular plants for particular bees and particular bees, and I would say that there are certain bees that only seek out certain plants. What this said to me is that there's a relationship there, regardless of how we can define that relationship or what we concluded as, that there is some relationship there. So for a good while, I would observe how the presence of bees often meant that you could be in the presence of plants and flowers, but that in some ways, how we choose to harvest flowers interrupts a relationship that we hold with bees, but it prolongs our relationship with flowers. So while bees will forage and harvest and seek out pollen, they essentially signal through those particular touches, that touch and those, that particular proximity and closeness, they signal to the flower that it has done as much as it needs to, and it shifts into what it seeks out to do next. So while the bees move forward and figure out what they communicate with what they've collected, the plant itself pulls in on itself and provides its own regeneration for its root and soil. If it's a perennial, even if it's an annual, that there was a relationship with bees, it intimates or at least suggests that we might have seeds that will grow again, so that there's a relationship that moves the things that we can be in a presence with forward. And it's clear that when we, for instance, use pesticides, we no longer have the presence of bees, but what we do have is aesthetic valuation that says that we have the most pristine precious flowers or plants, right? They're not bitten, they're not bruised, and what they can signal to us is most often that there's some matter of inorganic or an inorganic relationship that has formed around it. And I think plants and flowers have been able to signal that, right, to other things like bees, and I think they respond. And if we are tuned by listening, paying attention, and I mean literal buzzing, right, and patterns, right? For instance, of when you water plants like tomato plants, you might often find a bee that, you know, within 2 minutes shows up, and what it's seeking out is to have some sort of right relationship to that plant. So it made me think about how much pesticides we use when I see the presence of so much pristine and aesthetically beautiful and, you know, unencumbered by, you know, bites and bruising, fields and paths and lawns and potted plants, right? It signals, it's almost like a litmus test of how much chemistry that is inorganic to our practices and inorganic to what we can even source without too much intervention or manipulation. It's a signal to us of how much of that is present within those environments and ecologies and systems.
I'm joined by brother Kamal Bell, farmer in North Carolina, and I'll allow brother Kamal to introduce himself, where he's from, and his and where did you do your studies at?
My undergraduate was at North Carolina A&T. I majored in animal science. My master's is in agricultural education. I also got that at North Carolina A&T. I'm currently working on my doctorate in agricultural extension education at North Carolina State.
That's solid. And so you mentioned you're the owner of Sankofa's Farm. Can you tell us the origins of Sankofa's Farm and, you know, you all's mission and some of the work that you all do?
So the origin of Sankofa Farms is it was created to get people who were affected by food deserts, healthy, nutritious food. And as we developed the model of the farm, that mission looks completely different than I actually envisioned it before we started the program, we started the farm. And the name Sankofa is out of West Africa, means to go back and get it. But the way we explain it to our youth is a term that means to remember your African ancestry as you move forward in life. So everything that we try to do at the farm, we try to keep the environment in that we're just stewards of the land and we don't own it. We try to keep that at the center of what we do here at the farm.
Oh, that's amazing. And to have people go back and connect to land is something we need more than ever. And you all recently gave packed food boxes for the Fight for 15. Could you tell me a little more about that?
Oh, yeah, so the Fight for 15 is a really cool initiative here. Well, it's an organization, but to raise up North Carolina, but they have an initiative where they're getting people who are living in food deserts or affected by food inequality, healthy food. And Clara reached out to us and asked, like, our missions were similar, and asked could they purchase 20 shares of our CSA. So CSA is community supported agriculture. And what that is when you produce a certain amount of food and people from the community are able to buy it in a bundle at an affordable price. So she asked if she purchased 20 bundles of our CSA. I was like, of course. And we ended up working, and they get food from us every other week. So we drop off food from the farm to them every 2 weeks. So it's a really cool initiative.
That's solid. And, given COVID-19 and the struggle against police violence, how has Sankofa responded to that? And how do you all see the best way to move forward?
That's a great question. I think you're the first person to ask us a question of that nature. I think people just see the farm. They just see like, oh, you're just producing food. But I don't think all the time they realize that we're working with youth as well. Well, people realize we're working with youth, but they just think from an agricultural context. So one thing that we've done is we're growing the program. We're actually going to have 7 youth this summer, or 8 this summer, and instead of our standard 5. And then we're also we talk about these things with students. So we always try to provide a social context for them and let them know socially what we're going against. And we have this conversation about we've been having them. We've been having conversations about their role in their community and how they can better it. So when something like this happens, it's not a big shift for us because it was working with our doing. So the situation with the police brutality is just that we have to realize that there are a lot of things going on in society, and sometimes things are manipulated to incur a certain response out of people, especially when we show that we're focused on a specific thing that can help us break the chains and change the system. So, and ultimately construct our own. So when it comes to police brutality, we try to talk about how to view it. We all talk about our own individual perspectives, but then why do the police exist? Why are we targeting Black people? How have people responded to this brutality? Why are people just seeing it now that Black people have been facing all these years of oppression? Like why did it take this instant? So we talk about it in that context to help us move forward and actually continue to push for change the way that we see it.
That's solid. That's solid. And you mentioned the youth program, and y'all have been doing excellent things. I've been following you all for years now. Could you tell us a little more about the youth program and how it's structured? What you all do with young people.
Yeah. So the program started in 2016. So it's been in existence since we had the farm. And the way that we structured the program was that we wanted the farm to be sustainable. And just outside of sustainable agricultural practices, the way to do that is to incorporate youth. So I invited students from the classrooms that I was teaching in to come out to the farm because I didn't think the school necessarily had the system to support the students. So the students have just come out here for the last 4 years, 5 years, and 5 summers. And they've just been growing with the farm and growing as young men and being able to respond to not saying doing it exactly, they've been able to create an idea of how they can respond to injustices and things that they don't see as correct in their community. It's a space for us to talk about those things, and it's a space for us to directly impact change. And that's what the program is for these young men.
And just for a little more context, in terms of being a Black farmer in North Carolina and in the South, what's the network like of Black farmers here? What may be some struggles in terms of against the power structure? All these different elements. What is it like being a farmer in NC and the network of farmers?
So farming has. Durham, that's where. If we want to go the historical route, it's rooted in racism and taking advantage of vulnerable groups. So you still see that metric in it today, but what we're trying to do is we've tried to put ourselves in a position where we know we have to deal with it, but how can we do everything on our part to deal with it and to deal with it the least amount of time as possible? It gets draining. So we do have a network of Black farmers that I talk to all the time, and we all communicate. We probably talk weekly at this point, which is real cool to see that our bond is getting stronger. But also to try to stay ahead of the curve and try to incorporate just the ideas of independence in everything that we do, because there's so many revolving parts around the agricultural system and also what's needed specifically on the farm, that when you're sourcing when you're trying to use these different metrics as a resource, like clearing land, you're not running into people that look like you. So trying to figure out, all right, when not necessarily saying that people are racist, but the structure of it is for me not to be able to reach out to a black man to clear land and have the equipment to do it, or even to no one is an issue. And it's 2020. So it's dealing with those type of instances. We're steady thinking about how can we change the system so it can more so reflect equality and independence on hiring.
For the independence is definitely necessary. So how can we support Sankofa Farms, and whether it be donating or whether it be stuff here in NT? What can we do to support y'all in this period?
But you can go to our website, SankofaFarmsLLC.com. There's a donate button, and whether it's 2 cents, whether it's $20, whether you say I ain't got no money, but I want to come out and volunteer, just to support in any capacity outside. It doesn't have to be monetary. So if people can just follow our journey, and people always ask how can they help, but people have talents and skills inherently that somebody's probably better at building stuff than me, or they know somebody can build stuff really well. Just connecting us to resources, that's the best way to help Sankofa, whether it's monetary or whether it's skills, whether it's, hey, I have some background in connection bees. So it can be so random. But if people can reach out and tell us how they think they can help, we can better say, hey, we might not need that, or we do need it. Just the communication, that goes a long way.
Okay, that appreciate that. And last thing, because I saw the amazing TED talk that you gave. Do you mind giving us a little brief overview of what you told the people and its significance?
Yes. So the talk was called Embodying Sankofa, and what the underlying factor of the talk was, I think it actually was right on time because it was done on February 22nd, and right that we transitioned like 2 weeks later into COVID. But was really embracing the new reality and leaving and building off of our prior knowledge on how we've been doing things to usher in a new way of thinking and a new way of doing things, a new way of action. And I hope people watch it and take that from it, because what we're doing is different, and it's ushering a new type of Black student that I don't think we've seen in a long time. So I hope people can embrace it and really see that we're trying our best with the resources that we have to try to change things as much as possible.
Yes, indeed. I took notes during it, brother, and again, it was an excellent talk. And thank you again for talking with me today. And looking forward to being in struggle with you. And I support Sankofa Farms 100%. And whatever we can do here based in Raleigh, whatever is necessary, just let me know, and we'll move forward.
Well, I do appreciate that.
Appreciate you, man. All right, thanks for joining, man.
No problem. Have a great day.
All right, you too.
All right, peace.
Is that it? Okay. Wow, what a session that was. A session on Black farmers and Black ecologies, co-produced and presented by Alexis Young, Nico Westbrook, Ajamu Amiri Dillahunt, and the inimitable JT Roane. This segment highlighted the sort of Black ecologies defined as both the historical and enduring vulnerabilities suffered by Black communities at the social and ecological margins of the US and of global society. I mean, a topic that is so often below the horizon. And it's also an intellectual demonstrate the intellectual and practical efforts of ordinary Black people to envision futures outside the historical matrix of dominion, slavery, and ecocide. The segment highlighted historical and ongoing environmental racism, as well as the work of Black communities in organizing mutual aid to confront the state and corporate actors engaged in toxic stewardship and ecocide, and to envision new futures beyond destruction, particularly in eastern North Carolina and southeast coast of Puerto Rico, rural Appalachian Kentucky, and New Orleans. The discussion included radical scholar farmers and a visual artist, which will be coming up soon. One of the things that I should point out is that we are aware that many people are not necessarily awake if they were living on the West Coast and may have missed the beginning of this program. For those who just want to carry on watching, you can see it at this YouTube link. But if you missed anything, you can connect to Watch Party on People Strike Facebook page and watch anything that you missed previously. So I hope you'll be able to catch up on the amazing introduction and this extraordinary program about Black farmers and Black ecologies. We will now move to the next session, and I want to bring on board my colleague Holden Cession. Let me just add you. Hey, Holden. Hey, how are you this morning?
I'm doing well. How about yourself, Firoze?
Yeah, no, good, great. Really enjoying this show. Got some amazing people. You get a insight into a different world, huh? That none of us really really got any clarity about before. I don't know how about you. You see that?
Yeah, it's been great to be able to hear and just hear some of the history and legacies of the work happening now, and to really hear about the ways that people are really powerfully weaving together all of these movements and moments into some powerful building work.
Yeah. Well, let me introduce people to you, Holden. You're a movement worker, an artist, a gardener, a freedom fighter. You're based in Greensboro, North Carolina?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. And the people you work with focus on developing infrastructure for statewide and local movements to be leaderful forces of change to build power and governance. Wow. Yeah. What's the name of the organization you work with?
Yeah, so I'm doing this work both locally and within the state of North Carolina. Locally, I'm working with a formation called Greensboro Rising, and so we're a Black-led multiracial coalition that is doing work focused on defunding police, investments, building alternatives within our community, and also working with NC Block, which is also a Black-led organization, and we're working on a statewide agenda that can connect all of the various issues happening across the 100 counties of North Carolina and get on an aligned Black-led state agenda that's focused on really moving into self-governance.
Well, that's great. And so I'm particularly grateful that you agreed to give us some time today. Holden is going to be your host for the next session, which we're going to be discussing the uprisings. And let me just get that banner showing. There we are, uprisings updates. We've got some really interesting updates coming up. And so over to you, Holden. I will sit into the background and let you fly.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Firoze.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. And are we able to let in Sonia?
Yep, let's have Donya in.
Hi.
Donya, hi.
Hi.
How are you all? I wish I had tuned in earlier. The little piece that I caught at the end there was so interesting.
Yeah, it's been a great segment. I would definitely recommend going back and looking back at it. We'll have it on YouTube, so I would definitely recommend.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yes, and I wanted to add that I've been a gardener farmer for many years, so I'm just like, really interested in all that.
Yeah, definitely. That's wonderful. Yeah, I think there's a lot happening right now with connecting gardening, farming, food, land justice work, and the importance of its role in this moment. So Sonia, am I pronouncing your name right?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So Sonia, you're joining us from Louisville, and you do work out there connecting with surge and racial justice activism. Can you tell me some more about the work that you do and what's happening down in Louisville right now?
Woo. For the last month, we have been in full-on uprising. It started with, of course, the killing of Breonna Taylor in March, which happened right before the stay-at-home orders around COVID-19. And so it was kind of quiet for a while. And then what really released things was when they, the police lied about what happened, lied on their reports. And finally, we got them to release the 911 call that Breonna Taylor's partner, Kenneth Walker, had made after the police shot Breonna. And as you probably know, it's clear in that message that he had no idea it was the police and that he was calling for help because someone had just killed his partner. And so that began the protests in the streets. Wow, there's so much. It's hard to know where to focus, but from the beginning, it has been this, a lot of different organizations, very much Black-led, youth-led. The Kentucky Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression has been very central in this work. Of course, Black Lives Matter, Louisville, and, there have been a tremendous amount of things happening all at once. There was a takeover of Jefferson Square Park, which is right smack in the middle of City Hall, the Hall of Justice, and the jail. And so that was, for a month, there was a community growing there, even a garden, actually a rather large garden that people just kind of spontaneously planted and is now really blooming, which is beautiful. But also like really making it a community for houseless people, for people with mental health issues, connecting people to resources, and also, of course, a base for political activism and work. Very soon after the uprising began, the National Guard was called in, and David McAtee, who was a very beloved member of the community and had a barbecue stand, was shot and killed. And so, that was just a very tragic moment, but also really, I think, just kind of solidified people's need to be out there and continue to protest and continue to be on the streets and continue to do the work. And this weekend, a protester was killed, Tyler Girth, a young white man, photographer, and he was killed in the park. after a day of standing up against white nationalists who had organized to come basically try to destroy the community at Brianna Square, which it was renamed. And the police used that opportunity to clear the park, to destroy all the tents, to destroy people's property. They actually had some white nationalists participate in the clearing of the park. We have photographic evidence of this. They gave them a banner to reward them for helping clear the park. It's come to light that 3%ers are in the police department. So much. But what has been amazing is the continuation and the deepening of the work. We have had some victories. In fact, I think the whole thing is a victory.
Yeah.
But we passed Brianna's law that there will be no more no-knock warrants. And due to the brilliant work of one of our local activists, Katura Heron, it was an expanded law in terms of mandating that all warrants had to be executed in a certain way, including that the cameras had to be turned on 5 minutes before a warrant was executed and left on until 5 minutes after. And of course it's recognized that this is not enough, but it was a victory. And they're in the process of firing one of the officers who killed Breonna Taylor. He is an officer who had sexual misconduct allegations against him in the past. Hoskinson, I think is his name. And of course, that's not enough. We want them all fired. We want them all prosecuted. And we want defunding of the police. And unfortunately, our Metro Council just passed full funding. So it's an ongoing struggle. It's building. People, and of course, there was the Senate race, as I'm sure you all were paying attention to the Senate race with our much, much loved Charles Booker, state representative. And although he lost in terms of the numbers, he would say we won because what it showed is that Kentucky is really ready for deep, deep transformational and radical change.
Wow. You just have, offered up so much into the landscape of Louisville, into the landscape of Kentucky. And I just want to honor all the work that folks have done. You elevated the importance of it being a Black-led and youth-led work. That is also what I'm hearing. It's also multiracial, is also responding to this moment in a number of ways, both being able to get a start of a policy win, but also around the win of building that power that is going to take Louisville a long way, and it's going to take the movement that you are building a long way. I want to go back to what you spoke about around the spontaneous gardens and the mental health support and the support for houseless folks. This is a trend that I'm noticing in places all around the country, from Seattle to Philly to Asheville to this is a trend that's happening. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on how this particular moment with COVID-19, how that has impacted the ways in which people are not only addressing the protests, the political moment, particularly around police killings, but are also really addressing people's concrete needs as well.
Yeah. Wow. Well, as we know, like COVID-19, I think really illuminated and magnified the inequalities inherent in this system and the continuing ways that racism and white supremacy are embedded in the system. And lucky for us, we got rid of Matt Bevin before this happened, our governor, and got a liberal, somewhat progressive governor in there who has also been calling out and naming the disparities, which is a first for Kentucky. But I think, one of the main and most significant things that's happening at this moment is the movements are being led by people most affected by all of these issues. And so it's kind of an organic building of this community that's addressing the needs right here and now, as well as addressing the systemic issues that are the more long-term, fight that we have. So that's really exciting. And, it's all kind of working together. I mean, I think we've all been able to have a vision of what's possible now and really believe in it more, because we've been fed the lie that this is as far as we can go. The best we can get is like some, Democrat who does this or that, and who's basically the same and representing the same interests. Kentucky has been known for our high level of incarceration, one of the highest levels of child abuse and impoverishment, and the most children with the most incarcerated parents, like the highest level of that. And I think now we're seeing, and we're also coming to be known as a fount of resistance against these things. And to see that State Representative Charles Booker not only had the support in Louisville, but out in Eastern Kentucky, which is often just written off, the coal mining areas. And to see, white, poor, and working class folks coming out for Charles Booker as well, and just embracing that vision of real change. Of course, he was in the streets with us too and got tear gassed, and we've got State Representative Attica Scott, who's the only Black woman as our state representative. But I just feel like we've come to have a different kind of pride in Kentucky with all of this and seeing what's possible. And, I had a little bit of a fear that after the shooting in Breanna Square this weekend, people would back off. And the opposite has happened. People have really dug in, like they are not gonna, and after the clearing by the police of the park. I went there last night, and Breanna Square is once again, they once again had this beautiful altar. There was an event, an incredibly creative, beautiful event with jellyfish and puppets, highlighting, needing to connect environmentalism and racial justice. So people are being really creative. And I don't know if anybody saw the beautiful takeover of the bridge.
I did see that.
Yes.
It was beautiful.
Oh my God. It was my honor to be part of that and to see it. There was an ofrenda made in the middle of the bridge. There were these art pieces. Then there was the banner up there, and we held the bridge for 6 hours, and Louisville hasn't seen this kind of thing since the 60s. And the police, unfortunately, they're pretty much like their own, like they're not accountable to anybody right now. They rounded up another 30-something people last night who were just on the streets in the square. But they're also showing us, they're kind of solidifying people's resolve by the way they're acting. So yeah, it's a fascinating time. It's a very hopeful time. It's a time full of grief. It's all of that. And yes, as I said, I saw the garden last night, and it's been raining for several days. And so everything is just like, I was like, oh, somebody's got to harvest this. There's a lot of kale.
That's beautiful. That is so beautiful to hear. Wow. Thank you so much for offering these, this glimpse onto all that is unfolding in Louisville. So much that so much that I did not know about. And also it's very strengthening as far as the resistance to really see places in the South. We talk about coal mine country, Appalachia, right? All across the South, going down to the Delta, right? All these places across the South that are oftentimes thought of being places where uprisings don't surge in these places, right? All these places in the South are mobilizing and rising up and really showing up for each other as well, and in really beautiful ways, in places that we oftentimes would not expect for those alliances to be happening.
Yes, absolutely. And I also want to lift up the fact that all over Kentucky, there have been protests to the extent that even in some towns, there's one or two people standing on the street corner with the sign. But I've never seen anything like it in my life, and I've been involved since I was a teenager with the Braden Center and all that. And it's all over the state. Multiracial, organized, led by youth. It's really inspiring.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you so much. And I see that Firoze has joined us back again. Hey,
yeah, indeed. I think we have another guest waiting to join us. So Sonia, thanks so much. It was really interesting and so kind of you to spare time to join us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, and the struggle continues, huh?
Yes, and you all are welcome to come visit us here in Kentucky.
If only they would let me,
Yeah.
But one day we will. Okay, so go well, huh?
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have Kamau coming in. Kamau.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you guys doing?
Great. Holden, over to you then.
Kamau, thank you so much for joining us today on People Strike Broadcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. So Kamau, you're based in Atlanta. I know that you're an organizer and a lawyer down there, doing and have been doing dynamic work down there for years. So if you could just tell us a little bit about what some of the landscape is looking like within Atlanta right now, as far as the uprisings are concerned, and how are you, and how are folks moving into this moment?
I would say right now, there's a lot of shifts taking place in terms of the uprisings. There's probably been a little less marches and demonstrations that's been happening, particularly at the intensity of what was happening, let's say earlier, like a week or two ago. One interesting development that I think is really important is that the Wendy's, where Rayshard Brooks was killed by the police, has been taken over by local community folks, and they've created a memorial and somewhat of a sort of autonomous or liberated zone that they've been holding. And as folks may know, the Wendy's, the night after the incident, actually the night of the incident, was actually burnt down. And a memorial was immediately created from the community. And the beautiful thing about it so far is that a lot of the folks who organize it, or I would say most of the folks who've organized it as the lead organizers, are actually from that community. They're not folks like me who do organizing every day. These are folks who just were outraged by what was happening. And so they decided to not let the city come in, at least at this particular point, and take back over this area, but to make it a memorial for the brother that was killed, and to try to start making some demands on the city around what should happen with that space post this Wendy's being burnt down. It's a private owned space, but right now they've been holding it. Young folks have been coming out carrying arms to defend the space. The police have left the space alone for this time period. It's reminiscent of what happened in Seattle with the autonomous space being created. And unfortunately, my understanding is that space has been moved on recently and the police have taken it back. But I think the fact that organizers and, again, local community folks And I will also add that there's a good portion of anarchists out there helping to support this local community. And I know about it because they called me, even though this is really close to our community home, to ask me to come out and offer any legal support or advice I could. And so I think it's a really good shift and turn from just struggling around policy, but to actually start claiming space in the community and owning space, and owning that space and saying, we want to control what happens in our community, who comes in our community in terms of law enforcement, what happens with the property in our community, and that we want to start building things that are important for the local folks here, as opposed to what's important to finance capital. So I think that stuff that's in that direction, that's really good. I think some of the similar or normal things that you expect to happen during this time are happening in terms of and particularly in Atlanta, there's been arrests, there's been bail hearings, and so the media shift, and unfortunately a little bit of some of the organizing shift is now on what's going to happen to this individual police officer. I think the Atlanta City Council and the mayor has already failed folks because when they had the opportunity to hold up funding from the police, all they did was pass a resolution, which of course is non-binding, and pass the full police budget with the claim that they're going to come back later and discuss this matter. So I think already the political elite and the economic elite are shifting the discussion and debate, trying to make it seem like they're on people's side by, doing Black Lives Matter advertisement and saying they stand with Black folks or whatever, when really what they want is calm and quiet so that, again, finance capital can go back, or consumerism can go back to whatever it can under the COVID crisis, but people can basically go back to buying things. So I think there's an interesting shift that's at play, and the question becomes whether or not folks who are organizing are able to sort of deal with this shift, whether or not the momentum can keep up. Folks can stay in the streets in some ways or find sort of alternative practices to call attention to the larger issue of not only police brutality, but the oppression of the Black community, or will, let's say, capitalist forces in the economic and political elite gain the upper hand and, get calm, get quiet, and go back to business as usual.
Yeah, that is so important what you're elevating, particularly that move that people made to occupy that Wendy's. And you talk about Black folks taking over space, especially in a city like Atlanta, that is all of an imagination as like Black Mecca, right? As like the blackest of Black cities, right? Without there being real conversations around the role of like capitalism and like and wealth, right? And how that actually stratifies between the experiences that Black folks are having across Atlanta. And so, right, how this is really like a movement of like Black, like the people of Atlanta, the Black people of Atlanta, not about the Black bourgeoisie, right, mm-hmm. so to speak. So yeah, that's such a powerful move, and also seeing these, also seeing across the country that folks are also struggling with this similar thing of, right, we're seeing things like Black Lives Matter murals like being painted on the street, and that being taken up as an effort by cities to try and create some type of faux solidarity movement with folks. But I'm wondering if you can speak to what folks are actually on the grounds demanding, and as far as the pressure that they're putting on elected officials to actually do some real substantive change.
Yeah, I mean, there's several coalitions here in Atlanta that have been formed that are, again, trying to push around the abolition of the police or the defunding of the police. There's others that are pushing for the demilitarization of the police and the decentralization of the police. And so I think there's a mixture of different demands that are happening. And I think it's sort of common at this stage, everything from saying that in terms of defunding, that when the police, instead of calling the police for things around mental illness issues, even domestic violence issues, low-level violations or ticketing issues, that there should be some other agencies that get called for these purposes, as opposed to folks with guns who have I mean, every white person has a white supremacist outlook, but who are purposely, who have guns and the law on their side to actually act out on a white supremacist outlook. So you have that dynamic that's taking place. And so I think folks are pushing, one of the interesting things that happened shortly after the huge protest took place was that there was a delay in the city, not only closing a city jail that they had promised to close, but converting it to a place where people can get some social service help in terms of getting out of jail or out of prison. And it was delayed, back and forth conversations. One good thing that came out of it was that the city itself tried to move right away on something like that and actually turned it into now, or at least provided the funding to have it be a sort of more of a social service place and close the jail. So there's been some happenings like that on the policy level that have been enacted that were stalled. But again, I think what we have to make sure of is that the city will do what it needs to do to feel like it's calming the masses of people and, quite frankly, calming the organizers and activists by giving us some tidbits, some things here. But the structural change that I think people are demanding is the thing that the shell game will be played with. And they'll give us one thing, but try to make sure that we're not doing anything to take away the real power that they have over how resources are distributed. Again, where policing goes, how policing takes shape and form, and making sure that they just only put us into a box of, if you want change, as the mayor of Atlanta said, then you vote, as if voting is the only way in which change happens. And it's probably, it's one way, but it's probably not the major way. In fact, it is not the major way, right? So so I think that's, again, I think there's these larger, not only conversations, but debates and opportunities, as well as forces that are moving to cut off other areas of organization and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. And I'm hearing that, right, part of that work. I'm glad, I also agree with you. I'm glad you put on the table, voting is not the way that we're like really doing that in a major way, particularly in a rigged democratic system, right? And so like what I'm also hearing is that like people are moving into political education and also visioning around, thinking about what are alternatives to calling the police, how can we arm and defend ourselves when we decide that we are going to then completely reimagine what a space can look like and how it can function for our people. What are some of those examples, if we are seeing examples of some of that alternative world and like kind of the political education building happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's taking place all over, as in people are now doing, going back to the 60s and 70s, doing political education in parks and in streets, right? Holding, there's a couple of groups that we're involved in. Our organization is called Community Movement Builders, in which we're doing public political education. We just got finished doing some political education with original members of the Black Panther Party who came to our community house and talked to not only our group, but again, some of the anarchist forces that have been helping the people at Wendy's and some of the folks at Wendy's themselves, so that there can be a certain continuum of what the struggle for Black liberation has been. And people can put out ideas with how they think it should be now and what's from the past that we can still take forward with us, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that sort of continuity of struggle is very important to keep in mind, and it's very important for folks to have it passed on to. And I think those conversations, again, are starting to happen, as well as, again, recognizing the Wendy's action is something that's happening that's sort of outside of the box or outside of the playbook during this recent history. Again, I think the Seattle thing is important. I think what's happening here is important. And I think there are different formations growing every day and starting, which I think is always fantastic when you have people who are saying that they're going to start organizations if they can't find one that suit them. They're going to join organizations and change them and try to make them more powerful. And I think that is happening too. You have a certain segment of the population, which, I don't think anybody was ever fooled by the purpose of the police or didn't have a real understanding, particularly young Black folks, of what police brutality was. But I think this particular uprising, because of obviously the time period in which it happened, some of the the things that have happened in the recent history, Trayvon Martin, in St. Louis, what's the brother's name? Escaping me. Mike Brown. I think that stuff this is now sort of a carryover of all of that energy that was happening then that is now spilled over. And I think, as folks have commented before, has led us to the largest sustained demonstrations in the United States since the assassination of Dr. King. And so that kind of energy and movement is happening all around. And again, I think the thing that we have to always look at is what is the state's reaction? What is the corporate media's reaction? What is the corporate reaction? Because that begins to help us see where we're winning victories per se, where we're trying to be shut down, people are being shut down, and then what is the propaganda battles that are happening, both for folks who have not come out in the street and for suggesting that there are some easy victories out there as opposed to long-term struggle.
Exactly. Right on. Yeah, definitely.
Not sure what happened there. But come on, as always, a fascinating presentation which throws up so many questions. I wish we had the morning with you or a whole day with you to tease out some of those issues. I mean, one last question I've just quickly posed to you is, to what extent are we seeing the establishment, building, or the creation of the world we want to live in, but being built today in Atlanta? I mean, the protest is organizing, but is it giving birth to something, a new world, even today?
I mean, I think it's yet to be seen. It's real. I mean, in spite of the fact that these protests have been going on for such a long time, relative to what's happened in the past, and even relative for the United States, to be honest, right? I think there's other nations, European nations, African nations. When you say protests, the expectation is that it's going to last at least 4 months, right? Or it's going to last for a while. So I think we are in this new area of sustained protest. And again, the question becomes, what does sustained mean? And obviously, if that energy cannot always be in the street, what are the other ways in which we're putting forth our sort of proposals for that new world, right? Some of it will be through legislation, but some of it will be sort of taking over areas and space and making the world that we want to see, right? And I think those things have to work together. And I think, obviously, in terms of Cooperation Jackson, working with Kali, the ideal of dual power is something that I think has to be embraced across the country in terms of how we sort of interact in terms of this moment in time. We've got to fight the powers that be, but at the same time, we've got to create models of what a new world looks like, because otherwise, unfortunately, people get discouraged at what they will get out of a political system that's meant to deter you in the first place. And so we have to continually try to think out and tease out not only what that looks like, but what can we do to put some of that stuff in practice as we go along. And I think some of that, again, is starting to happen here in Atlanta. And I think the exciting part for me is that some of it is happening amongst people that we would normally consider unorganized, the community itself, the folks themselves, again, who don't have the experiences that I have as somebody who's now been organizing for 30 years. These folks came out and said, not only were they, going to fight and tussle over the issue of police brutality, and exact a price for the killing of this Black person, but post that, we're going to hold this space for as long as we can to make sure that everything doesn't just get swept away, that the building doesn't just get torn down, that a new Wendy's doesn't just get built back up, but now this is a permanent marker of the murder and assassination of a Black person. And now the question becomes, what do we do with this space, right? Do we make this space something that's important and useful for the community? And people are sort of bubbling with those ideas. And obviously the question is, can we as low resourced folks put enough pressure, make enough noise, gain enough resources to make something happen with that space and other spaces, quite frankly, so that they're in the hands of the larger community and not just turned back over to bad fast food restaurants which weren't serving our community anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I just wonder about the sort of vocabulary we may have to learn. I was reminded of Michelle Alexander's piece, which I've just got up here in the New York Times, where she argues, we are not the resistance. She's arguing that it is we who are trying to give birth to a new world, and it is they who are the resistance. It is the state, it is the police, and even the structures of capitalist democracy, the voting, etc. And I just wonder, to what extent can this language be changed so that we define ourselves as those giving birth rather than being protesters against something, being people engage in something positive. We are proponents, not opponents.
I think some of that, again, with I think the state at large, writ large, is a little scared right now, to be honest, right? I do think the state is frightened. And I think they're in a holding pattern and a figuring out pattern of how to put this back in a box. And again, like we're expressing, our job is to make sure that it never gets back in a box. And so I think some of the forward-thinking demands of the abolition of the police and a rethinking of how city resources should go is a very powerful demand, right? Part of that is for me too. And what does policing look like as a demand and change, right? If there's going to be policing, one of the reasons why our organization has began to focus on sort of demilitarization and decentralization is that if there's going to be any kind of policing force in our community, then again, we must control that force. That force has to be decentralized. It cannot be a top-down force that has a military structure in which there's a commissioner or a chief, and all the troops under that structure report to this person. We call for community boards to have control over local precincts to hire, fire, and discipline people who do any sort of policing in our community whatsoever, right? So we think whatever mechanism is left, or whatever mechanism which doesn't get abolished, right? Or whatever mechanism is there because they do not abolish at all, that still has to be changed, right? And so I think those things are now what used to be considered strictly leftist or far or radical thinking, has now at least reached some mainstream avenues of critique, discussion, and something now that the state, the resistance to these things, has to reply to, and at the very least make some semblance thereof of "we hear you," right? Which is different from them giving in or them understanding that the game has changed. So we've not reached that yet. But I think we've reached this level. Then the question becomes, as always, whether or not we can continue to push forward to scare and or defeat the state power particularly at the local level and at a larger level, and whether or not we are able to create some mechanisms outside of that force that replenish us, right? Even as we keep doing battle. Right. So that part has to be done together. We have to think about ways in which we can control our food sources, control, again, what entities come into our community, start to create opportunities for us to have worker cooperatives and create things that we need, as opposed to thinking that the answer is just to buy anything that's out in the market. So we have to continually think, and sometimes it's not in our wheelhouse, to be honest, right? We as organizers and activists, a lot of times we're used to protesting. That's our wheelhouse, right? But it takes a lot of different types of skills to create a revolutionary movement, revolutionary change. And we have to be willing to say, what are those skills that are needed? How can we apply those skills? How can we make these things happen to move us forward as we battle the state, which we know does not want this change to happen?
Right. Well, that has been great, Kamal. Thanks for joining us once again on People Strike. Really appreciate your giving us time.
Yes,
And Holden, I think we have Nikita, who's been very patiently waiting for us. Shall I add her to the stream?
yes, please add her.
Nikita.
Peace. How's it going this morning?
Oh, great. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you all as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to, Holden, I'm going to leave you to introduce Nikita, who is an amazing background. But I think it'd be good for people to know something about her.
Yeah, definitely. So we have Nikita Oliver here with us. Thank you so much, Nikita. You're based in Seattle. I know you do community organizing and abolition work. Also, a dope poet. And I've had a chance to hear some of your moving poetry that you've done, and also holding down work with the Seattle People's Party, which is also something extremely exciting for me to hear about your work with as well. So yeah, I just want to open up to you to just share more about the work that you're doing in Seattle, and just the groups that you're rocking with, and how y'all are responding to this moment.
Yeah, I'm presently organizing, and you'll have to excuse me, as y'all said earlier on your show, that the CHOP was invaded by Seattle Police Department this morning at 5:30 a.m. So there's a lot of emergent organizing happening in response. There were 20 people arrested, and a lot of folks without homes swept. So, trying to figure out how we support people in their humanity right now. I'm organizing as it relates to the present moment with two coalitions. One is Decriminalize Seattle, which focuses very specifically on defunding the police, investing in community-based public health and public safety strategies, and then freeing all protesters, just acknowledging that anyone in the streets for Black lives, for Black liberation, should not be prosecuted, should not be incarcerated. And so working to free those folks, and obviously the criminal punishment system alongside police should be defunded and dismantled. That coalition is working in partnership with King County Equity Now, which is a Black-led organizing body that focuses specifically on Black-led organizations and Black organizers, doing the work of figuring out, as we defund the police, as we defund the criminal punishment system, what do investments look like? And the priorities being freeing the land and making sure that there is access to the economic capital to do the work necessary to make sure that Black community is viable and thriving. And so those two coalitions are partnering together, knowing that the criminalization end of this white supremacist system has played a major role in keeping Black folks down, and a lot of BIPOC communities. And then knowing that we have to have a plan for what does equitable development look like? What does it look like to have thriving communities, especially for Black and Native peoples?
Mm-hmm. Wow. Thank you so much, Nikita. And thank you for taking time to be with us in the midst of so much that is happening, that you're also plugging into in Seattle. And so you mentioned this piece around economics, and being able to contend for Black folks to be able to contend for life in Seattle, and folks of color. Seattle has seen, just like many other cities, like waves of gentrification, waves of push out, increases in houselessness, the building of new jails to continue to incarcerate our people. How has all of that impacted this moment, and how people are actually plugging into this growing movement that's happening in Seattle, and seeing themselves reflected in it?
Yeah, there is a very long history of abolitionist work in Seattle, and a long history of occupation for the purpose of establishing cultural spaces for disenfranchised communities. We have the El Centro de la Raza, the Coleman School, known as the Northwest African American Museum, Daybreak Star, Horace Manor, all spaces that have been occupied in the last 50 years for the purpose of making sure that communities that have been disenfranchised have access to cultural spaces. But in the last 10 years, very specifically in 2010, the Department of Justice did an investigation on the Seattle Police Department, finding that there was disproportionality or issues around use of force specifically, and then possible racial disproportionality in terms of how they were applying that use of force, and how policing was going down. Obviously, these are not new facts to the Black or Native community, and the Native community was actually a part of the uprising in 2010 after the murder of John T. Williams that brought the Department of Justice to Seattle. And that time frame, a consent decree was put in place, a 5-year consent decree, where there was an expectation that the Seattle Police Department would be quote unquote reformed, and that they would effectively then be off that consent decree. In that same time frame in 2012, we started fighting the building of a new youth jail. The county that Seattle is in, King County, has spent $233 million building a new facility that opened at the end of last year that presently has only 28 youth in cages. It can hold 110 young people. But in 2012, the community acknowledged two things. First, that the rate of juvenile crime was going down in the nation. So a fiscal investment in a new jail was fiscally irresponsible. But more importantly, our analysis tells us that the school to prison pipeline targets Black and Indigenous youth, and that what was going to happen is that new facility was going to disproportionately incarcerate our children. And so that is true of the youth that are in there. They are predominantly Black youth, predominantly Indigenous youth, the 28 that are still in the facility. And so that built into another fight, which was a Block the Bunker campaign on the north side of Seattle, where they were attempting to build a new police precinct that was going to cost $180 million. And the community effectively was able to block the building of that new facility. And so there has been a significant history, especially in the last 10 years, of an abolitionist framework being built leading up to this moment. And so the conversation around defunding the police is very significant in that in the past 3 years, we started first with divestment. And that was both divestment in partnership with our Native relatives of acknowledging the investment in tar sands and pipelines are the same banks investing in private prisons. And so really building the muscle of our region of people being able to politically talk about divestment as a real strategy for abolition. And I feel like in this moment, we've made a considerable leap forward. We're talking about defunding the police in the mainstream conversation, which has really also opened the door to talk in the mainstream conversation about abolishing the police, the idea that the police do not keep us safer. And really they are an apparatus of the state for oppression and state-sanctioned violence, and that we really should be investing in public health and public safety strategies for everyone. But this has really been a conversation that has been in the making, for at least 10 years, but probably 50 plus years.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, Nikita, whether you could comment about the effects and impact of the COVID pandemic, because in a sense, these are mirror images of each other, from incarceration to frontline working and so on. What's the situation in Seattle, in Washington State, and how is it affecting the organizing and the creativity of the movement?
Yeah, so Seattle was one of the first cities where cases were found. We had the highest rate initially, and we were one of the first counties to be told we had to stay at home. And when I think about what COVID is doing, I actually see it being akin to what happened in 1968, where you see an immense exasperation. Granted, it's by a public health crisis, but COVID has exacerbated the pre-existing conditions of economic injustice. And simultaneously, we are seeing an uprising against racial injustice, the convergence of which, initially we thought it meant people would not come into the streets. But reality is so many people are at home on May 29th, when the first rally was had, and then May 30th, when the rally where some of those iconic pictures of the police car being on fire came out. I think people being at home, people, for 3 months having now experienced what an exasperation of economic inequality feels like, having so many of our workers in our region out of work, seeing so many corporations treating their workers inhumanely. I think there is a segment of Seattle, which is a predominantly white city, that, finally got a taste of how racialized capitalism works. And as May 30th approached, felt the need to have to get in the street. So while COVID, certainly has caused some challenges on how we do protest and forced us to be creative, at the same time, COVID has created an environment where we have seen more people in the streets in Seattle as it relates to the Black Lives Matter movement than we have ever seen. And I think that just simply has to do with, we have a segment of our population of white folks that have been hit by the economic end of racialized capitalism in such a way that they can no longer go back to sleep about the fact that this whole system is actually constructed against all of us. Black folks and Native folks just so happen to be the ones that have always been at the bottom. And so, you would think that COVID would make people want to stay home. I think in actuality, the poor management of the COVID crisis, the lack of economic resources into our middle income families and our low income families has actually pushed people into the streets. And that has now brought a very significant convergence of the racial justice movement with the economic justice movement and the labor movement, which I think is akin to what we saw in 1968 when the Poor People's Campaign launched, which we know ultimately was a part of the reason why MLK was assassinated. Being able to effectively bring together white people affected by economic injustice with Black and brown folks affected by racial injustice has brought forth a very large uprising in our region.
I mean, let me ask. I mean, what I think right across the U.S. and elsewhere, indeed, the mobilization of Black people on the streets in my view, is a profound expression of their reclamation of their humanity, and indeed even to invent what it means to be human, with the networks of self-support, all the mutual aid, all this happening. And the question that I've posed, and some people have laughed at me for it, is to say, well, yes, there are economic and other reasons why white folk have come in, but to what extent is this the beginning of their recognition of their own dehumanization, and therefore a search in that solidarity, a search for their own liberation, for their own reclamation of humanity? The old expression, solidarity is what love looks like on the streets. Yeah. So I mean, what's your comment on that?
I mean, I do think that's certainly true for, some white folks in our region. I think time will tell how much of this is an awakening and a reclamation of their own humanity. We're 30 days into the uprising in our region. And I can say, I was at a protest yesterday that was considerably smaller than any of the other protests I've been to in the last 30 days. And it was predominantly Native and Black folks and Latinx folks in the crowd. So people who have, obviously a daily lived experience of the reason why we're in the streets. And so, we may see things shift now that the police have moved in on CHOP, and there's been yet again another inhumane sweep of houseless folks, which is, is inhumane in normal times, but is even more, quote unquote, normal times, is even more inhumane in the midst of a global pandemic when people have no safe place to go. I would like to believe that our comrades in the streets are there because they want to reclaim their humanity. But I was in the 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016 uprisings when, many other folks, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Garner. And what I feel like we have seen each time is maybe a month of commitment. And then at some point, people get exhausted. And Black and Indigenous people of color, we don't have an option to get exhausted when it comes to fighting for our liberation. One of my fears is in this time, as our state begins to reopen up, is that capitalism will call people back to their jobs and call them back to the daily grind that we're all in just to survive.
Yeah.
And as a result, we won't, the city is only 4% Black folks, less than 1% Native. So in Seattle, to sustain an uprising, we actually really do need our white comrades and accomplices to have a significant investment in reclaiming their humanity as well. And so again, I think time will tell, and we'll see how the state reopening impacts the present uprising.
I wonder if we could invite Saki onto a discussion around this as well.
Hi.
Saki, hi, great to see you again. Saki is, of course, well known. Holden, do you want to say a few words about her? Or I can...
Yeah, I can. Saki, so good to see you again. Saki, she's a Black feminist, mother, birth worker, educator, and journalist, engaging in work around collective struggle for African liberation, and is one of the founding members, of Cooperation Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi, doing some powerful solidarity economy work. So thank you so much for being on, Saki.
Thanks, you guys. Glad to be a part of it again.
And Saki, if you want to, you can go and just take some time to tell us about some of what's been happening on the grounds in Jackson, both as it relates to the powerful work around Co-op Jackson, solidarity economies, and connecting that to this particular moment of uprisings and global pandemic.
Yeah. But also, I just want to add that, I mean, Corporation Jackson was the outcome of a people's assembly. And I understand that that's re-emerged. And so it'd be really interesting to have that historical overview.
Of the People's Assembly process in general?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a long arc of history in terms of people's assemblies being practiced in Mississippi. And when you say that Cooperation Jackson comes out of one, our organization comes out of the Jackson Kush Plan. And so I think a reiteration of and the continuation of the People's Assembly model here in Jackson emerged during the process leading up to the election of Chokwe Lumumba to become a city council member, and then subsequently become the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi. And the People's Assembly process and the way that it was organized by the Malcolm X grassroots movement included a people's task force, and a task force that carried on the work and the coordination coming out of people's assemblies and in between people's assemblies, and organized along the different lines of whatever issue areas that folks were trying to tackle. The assemblies, I think, played a particular role also coming out of Hurricane Katrina. And so right now we are engaged in trying to reignite the People's Assembly and trying to develop popular education materials in order to encourage people everywhere to develop and organize people's assemblies, and to have them really be a venue where community members are coming together to develop action plans, and particularly around action that we can begin taking immediately ourselves, not only action that we have to put pressure on and demand on the state to address, although that is a part of it also. Long term, we're hoping to build towards power and towards dual power, where we have a mass base of people who can exert their power in terms of holding the state accountable, but also, really developing the idea of self-reliance, building on mutual aid, developing a solidarity economy, and having those things work together where people are democratically able to work together to meet our needs. We actually on Juneteenth held a People's Assembly, and we've had a follow-up online since then. And tomorrow actually it's going to be our second follow-up to the People's Assembly that we initiated on Juneteenth. And one of the popular areas that we tackled was police terror and state terror, right? And people are really interested in we've come up with a lot of ideas in terms of what, after a discussion of what that looks like here in Jackson, like what is it that we want to be doing in Jackson? And a lot of, I think, proactive things came out. People are really interested in things like Cop Watch. And so, yeah, we're hoping that we can lend not only for folks to look at the model of people's assemblies here in Jackson, and there's a really good, I think, overview of the history of it in our Jackson Rising book. But hoping that just as much as we're talking about building mass movements towards a people's strike, we need to be talking about what comes long term, what comes next. And People's Assembly model is a way and a venue for that to happen.
Yeah, so the newspaper's been full of all this Confederate flag being taken down. I mean, is this your doing?
Well, I think there's been a movement for a long time for the Confederate flag. That's a part of and at the center of the Mississippi state flag to be taken down. With the current momentum and the Floyd rebellion, we definitely saw an opportunity to push even further for that. And so on Juneteenth, before the People's Assembly, we held a press conference demanding for the state flag to be removed immediately. And we aren't and weren't the only ones who have had that demand, but I definitely think that we, given the time and the momentum of all of the rebellion happening all over the country, recognized that now again indeed was a time to be able to put that pressure on. And it's happening. The governor signed it into being yesterday. But ironically, he at the same time blocked the Black Caucus from being in attendance.
Yeah.
And so that says a lot. And then I think it also happened to be, but just like was decided to have it be signed on like some historical day for the Confederacy itself, right? And so it's kind of like we're going to do this because that's what the time and the pressure is dictating. But it definitely is like a begrudging act to do that, and to do it in a way that denies the Black representatives to be a part of it and to attend and to witness it. And so,
well, I mean, Corporation Jackson has been absolutely central and instrumental in creating this current environment where we're online. We've got every month, first of every month, People's Strike. You've been very much in the sort of forefront of pushing this idea. What is it about Jackson and the struggles that you've been involved that this should come from you?
I mean, I think that we have been developing work and an ongoing analysis of the power and the impact that working class Black people and particularly like working class people in general can have, given taking matters really into our own hands. And in Jackson and in Mississippi, although it's a very exploitative, repressive, racist state, because of the state and capital's relationship to the state, relationship to capital. There are also a lot of, I kind of call them like loopholes and opportunities and windows to be able to build and develop and exercise power. And so recognizing that, and the idea of people strike and striking in general strikes and boycott and divestment sanctions work has been a part of our analysis and an idea in terms of strategy. And so, you know, the combination of all the different crises of the environment, of housing, and then on top, you know, of like white supremacy, and then on top of it, you know, COVID and the health pandemic really presented another period of like very, very heightened contradiction, where we felt it was important to be able to, and the need to take a bold step and move towards mobilizing people across this empire to develop and to be able to be in position months down the line to call a general strike, right? I mean, and I think that the different ways in which we've seen what organizing and mobilizing and direct action and the impact that that can have and that can take over the course of the Black liberation, civil rights, all the different eras here. And although, you know, unfortunately, it's led to incremental reform, it has led to the type of change that I think creates space for us to push for further and further further change and transition, and for that transition to ultimately be a transformation and a revolutionary transformation in society. You know, I mean, I think that coming out of Jackson and coming out of Mississippi as one of the stark examples on a state level of what nationally the United States represents is another reason why we're here and doing this work here and in this place.
Right.
And, you know, just looking at the sheer numbers, we're still in a majority Black city, you know, 80+%. There's still, and that on top of, you know, developing, creating, and strengthening solidarity across working class communities, I think demonstrates the possibilities and the potential.
Right, right. This idea of strike and strike action and even moving towards a general strike. Nikita, I mean, how does that?
I don't know if it's my internet, but you just broke up, Firoze. I wasn't hearing.
Sorry.
I couldn't hear what you.
Okay, I'm just saying this idea of a people's strike, of strikes in different sectors, of a move towards a general strike, and so on. I mean, I just wanted to ask Nikita. I mean, in Seattle, what's been the response to that? And I mean, is it just mobilizations, or are there possibilities? I mean, you talked about the risks that people face if they they lose their income if they go on strike. So, what's its resonance, and how is that building there?
Yeah, you know, Seattle has a very different landscape than I would say Mississippi, just in the sense that the city has been rapidly changing over the last 10 years. We're up now to almost 800,000 people in the city, many of whom are tech workers who are from outside of the city. And so I think there is a very big difference between those who are in the upper economic establishment that are in the tech industry versus those that are not. And so I think, some people would buy into a people's strike, but to be quite frank, I'm not sure Seattle is a city where that's going to start, just because of the various industries that are here that are running. I mean, there's a serious political establishment or corporatocracy that is running our city. We have a corporate mayor who uses the language of progressive movements, and yet does right-wing action, and she was overwhelmingly voted for. We had a huge struggle getting Councilmember Shama Sawant back into office this last election. Amazon poured millions of dollars into our last city council race, and Councilmember Sawant only won by about 1.5%. So there is a considerable amount of the population in Seattle that is bought into the corporate establishment. And I do think it would be hard to start a people's strike in our region.
Yeah. Oh dear, we've lost Saki again. Oh no, there she is.
Yeah, I couldn't hear any of what you said. So.
Oh, sorry.
And then I got dropped, so it must be my internet signal.
Well, if I allow me to just summarize, I mean, it's a different ballgame in Seattle. There's a different social layers, people who are in the tech industry and so on. But there have been real struggles in terms of local elections for mayors, and with Amazon pouring millions into a counter campaign. And so, I mean, Corporation Jackson became so well known with the election of the first Black mayor. So where are we now? We have still a Black mayor in
well, he wasn't the first Black mayor,
no,
but definitely the first
Jackson
out of.
Was very closely tied to that campaign. But so where are we now? How has that changed the capacities, the abilities to organize, to get a credibility for a proposition of a strike?
Good question. I don't think so. I mean, I think that we were having this discussion because we've been in a planning / political education retreat for the last 3 days. And we definitely prefer the conditions on the ground here with the current mayor that we have, because at least there's, at least we can engage in a discussion and a debate. Compared to in a lot of other places. I don't know though that given the limits of what it is to manage the state in any city, county, kind of municipal level here in the United States, given the social and political and economic systems and structures that are in place, that it's created the type of space that's needed, and I think that we have to push for that more. But I think that the point of talking about it in terms of the people's strike and talk about it in terms of people's assemblies is really what is needed, is that we are organizing together each other and developing. And really the only ones who can say what the solution is that gets to the heart and gets to the root of what the problem is. We can't expect for anyone, really we're contending with capital. We're really contending, right, with the economic basis of power that props up all these other things. And so So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question fully for Rose, but I mean, I think that, you know, having a Black mayor, having a progressive mayor, having a mayor who's espousing to do and be more than progressive, but to be radical, definitely gives us an opportunity to, when we're organizing and when we're mobilizing, present what alternatives are and present what solutions are and present what changes are needed in a very different way than, and the struggle and what that looks like is very different than in a lot of other places.
Nikita, I wonder whether you have questions for Saki in terms of their struggles.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to hear, you know, obviously Operation Jackson and the elections were very inspiring for us in Seattle. You know, part of the work around the Seattle People's Party was the idea that if you had an empowered peoples that had radical solutions to dismantling, you know, oppressive structures, and that base of people was strong and empowered, then maybe you could get someone into office who did espouse those radical notions and maybe see some significant movement. You know, which is interesting in the Pacific Northwest because people think Seattle is so progressive. You know, I go travel places and people talk about the progressive things they've heard, but you know, the experience of Black and Indigenous people of color on the ground here is actually that Seattle's quite faux progressive. The language is there, but the action is missing. And so, you know, Operation Jackson actually inspired some of the work of the Seattle People's Party. You know, I'm wondering, like, now that y'all are a few years down, are there things that y'all would have done differently or things that you would tell communities like my own that are using some of your model and determining how we move forward that we should be watching out for or different ways that we could be doing that work?
Yeah, and then I have a question for you. I think that I'm going to again stress the People's Assembly model, and that even when you incorporate multiple tactics in a toolbox, that I think we all have to be really careful about, because you know we have limited time, limited energy, limited resources, right? Like being careful about how much goes into any particular tool or tactic. And so, you know, I think that we could potentially be in a different place when we're looking at the development of the solidarity economy, for example, had the momentum around developing people's assemblies and developing the practice and the muscle of folks like really democratically making decisions together, and then being able to see that move out of the People's Assembly and move into spaces and kind of decision making on a larger scale, and having the impact on some of, I think, the solution oriented areas, and not as much on the reaction to and the defensive kind of like areas, like, you know, there was like the education system, there was the airport, like, and because it's really going to be that development of the people and the people's practice and the you know the kind of like honing out, making mistakes, but still developing relationships and developing the practice of debating, of disagreeing, and still trying to get to a end goal, that I think is gonna be what actually makes the difference, right? Because how do you hold a position like the city position of mayor or any other thing that gets contested and won if you don't have a group of people who can, and increasing the numbers of people who can maintain that, who can continuously support in their, like, you know, vote in their interest. And so, you know, I think that in a lot of ways, although things were still moving in the multiple areas, a lot of attention and a lot of resources and time and energy were put into the electoral part, and it can't only be that. And although, you know, we're looking at not, you know, our assembly and other assemblies in the city, there was a lull of that at one point, and that sets us back in terms of what we really can do. And the part of it that I think is also just really important is like for folks to be able to experience and see and feel and celebrate the self-reliance that also comes out of saying, this is something that we need to see, this is something that we want to make happen, and doing it ourselves and not having to wait. And a lot of those things can be done, and folks can take into our own hands, you know, through a process of organizing ourselves to you know, develop all kinds of ways to meet our needs. And so, yeah, I'm wondering if I can also ask a question. I'm wondering, you know, when we were leading up to Juneteenth and learning, and later on in the broadcast, I'm going to be talking with Clarence Thomas of the ILWU. I'm wondering, with Seattle and other major cities and port areas on the West Coast, Seattle being one of them, what is the relationship to labor and folks, you know, being willing to withhold their labor and do some actions? Has like, what's that relationship now? Is it shifting? Is it changing? What are the opportunities and that you see?
Yeah, you know, I think that is an unfolding relationship. It has been a significant gap, I feel, in the last 10 years, whether you're talking about our mobilization around addressing climate change or building social housing or Black Lives Matter movement. Our partnership with the labor movement has been tenuous. It's taken nearly 20 years to get the Seattle Police Officers Guild out of the King County Labor Council, which just happened in the last month. But that required a significant amount of organizing of rank and file. And ultimately, it came down to a vote of the rank and file to determine that Seattle Police Officers Guild would be removed from the Labor Council. We did, on the day of the Juneteenth national strike, there was a mobilization with ILWU. It was not a major mobilization, and I would say not a lot of other unions necessarily joined in solidarity with that port strike. And so it's what is, again, I think kind of the downfall of some of our work here is that there is a use of progressive or radical ideas without the radical action that accompanies it. Oftentimes our labor unions are used against radical movements. An example of which would be the collective bargaining agreement with the police. A year ago, many unions came out in support of the police CBA as a workers' issue, and it was completely overlooked that there's a human rights issue when collective bargaining agreements of police unions are used to are used against the rights of residents. And so I actually think there's a lot of work that needs to be done between our racial justice movements and our labor. But again, part of our region being so predominantly white and having so many corporations that are in bed with our electeds, that are in bed with our, honestly, the heads of unions, not necessarily the rank and file, but the leadership in unions, really does create a lot of division in our movement and our ability to align. And I think there's also a missing racial justice analysis, understanding that race has to intersect with labor movements. We even see this with the socialist movement in our city, where socialists want to make it all about class, but are unwilling to talk about that if you make it all about class and don't have a racial justice analysis, you may create a socialist society that still keeps Black and Indigenous people at the bottom. Case in point, the way in which Cuba functions, right? So there's a lot of work to be done there, and a lot of, if we're going to get to a people's strike, a general strike, we would have to have labor on board.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And I think that some of what we're seeing or we've seen is that the momentum and the drive has to be happening and come from our organizing other folks and continuing to push on labor. And I think that the people strike and the start of that in May, and kind of like the momentum that it's built, I think has actually caused labor to have to like stop and look and even if it's not in direct association with the people strike, we have seen in the last couple of months some more labor forces get involved in terms of trying to take more direct action.
Yeah, Holden.
Yes, well, thank y'all so much. This has been an enriching conversation. I appreciate so much of what y'all both brought into this conversation, just around the multiple tools and tactics that are being utilized in this moment to really build power and move beyond this current moment to building what we need next, the type of political power that we need, the type of self-governance that we need in this moment, like across sectors and across movements. So just want to say thank y'all so much for being on and offering that up with us today.
Yeah. I mean, also I'd like to add my thanks, and I think there is an issue that we probably have to return to again, and that's the opportunities created by a local politics, local government, which creates opportunities, but there's also what I hear, especially from Jackson, Mississippi, is concurrently creating the alternate to the capitalist state structures. And I think that's really exciting, because that is the building of a future, not merely a reaction or taking an opportunity of a mayor who is favorable. But it's something I think we can return to a discussion on at another stage. But thank you both.
Yeah, I think we have to return to the discussion on it, because there are a lot of, I think, challenges and pitfalls that we have to be thinking about and looking at, particularly as, like this moment being on the, on the cusp of this, national, federal, presidential election, and all the conversations around elections, around voting, and around, the idea of like voting being power, is something that, especially I think like Black folks in this country have to really be dissecting. We can't continue to be doing the same things in different moments and thinking that we're going to get a different result. And so while there's opportunity, and there's definitely, an argument for folks engaging more on municipal level electoral politics, like, what do we do? What we're doing that to what end? And what are we doing if we aren't even contesting this two-party system, right? And so there's a lot that we could talk about.
And I would say, as somebody who ran for office on a radical platform, that too much investment in electoral politics actually takes away from people's hunger to be developing the alternative systems, because it directs us back to a system that is already disingenuous about its interest in seeing everyone thrive. I mean, this system is built on white supremacy. Capitalism requires an exploitation of people and labor and planet. And if we're not actively building the alternative system, then what we really do is convince people to buy into the system that's not working. You know, they start to see voting and participation in electoral politics as the end goal, as opposed to one tool in our diversity of tactics of getting us to the end goal, right? If you're running for office and your goal as an elected official is not to dismantle the system we know that is deeply built in oppression and exploitation, then what we're doing is convincing people to stay invested in a system that has no interest in their humanity or their health or their thriving. And so, you know, part of what the People's Party reflected on after our last election was, do we actually even keep being in electoral politics, or is our focus need to be on building those solidarity networks, building those alternatives to incarceration, those alternative economic networks, and instead try to topple the system through more of a people power mode through mutual aid? You know, and I think that's a contention, because our elders fought very hard for the vote, and yet voting has not significantly changed the way Black and Indigenous people live here.
It's such an old debate, you know. It reminds me of, was it Einstein who said, you know, the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting to have a different result. I think, you know, I have a feeling that, you know, we haven't an alternative. It's both and. It's a question of the degree of emphasis that one has to place on it. So, but anyway, that's a time for another debate. I think we have some very patient people who've been waiting in the waiting room. So I'd just like to say thank you, Nikita. Thank you, Saki. And I'm sure we'll continue this discussion. Over to you, Holden.
Yeah.
Shall I bring the others in?
Yes, thank you, Firoze.
Okay.
All right, we're continuing our conversation, and we have 3 new guests who are with us. Thank you so much for all of your patience. And I know, Rose, you were on here earlier this morning too, and so thank you for coming back and hearing your words earlier this morning. We're so inspiring and timely. And so with us today, we have for this second session, we have Haley Pessin, who is a member of Afro Socialists and Socialists of Color Cause of the Democratic Socialists of America, and ranking file member of 1199 SEIU. We have Rose Brewer, who I mentioned was on here earlier today, who's based in Minneapolis, doing sociologist, North Alumni Distinguished Teaching Professor of African American Africana Studies. And she's a member of the People Strike Black Caucus as well. And then we also have Ash Williams. What up, Ash? In Charlotte, with Charlotte Uprising. Ash is an organizer based in North Carolina. They've done work with Charlotte Uprising, worked with Black Trans-led coalition that was formed in 2016 in response to the police killing of Keith Lamont Scott. And they have been making moves ever since then in Charlotte on a plethora of issues and concerns. So thank you all for being here. And I want to start. I want to start with you, Rose, and see if you'd like to just offer up any more about yourself and the work that you're doing specifically in Minneapolis. I think particularly as somebody who has been in movement work for years, who has seen multiple fronts, multiple struggles. You would like to offer anything that feels particularly different or nuanced about this political moment, especially for Black folks in Minneapolis.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on. And certainly we are dealing with what I would call a very unsettled situation in Minneapolis. I suspect that's the case all over. given the nature of the uprisings that have gone on. And I have actually been involved in one way or another fighting police brutality in Minneapolis since the 1990s. In an earlier broadcast, I mentioned the murder of Tysel Nelson, a teenager who was shot in the back by Minneapolis police and murdered. So we're talking about 30 years of continuous police violence with no response except a slap on the hand. If that, the only exception was the killing of a white woman about 3 years ago by a Somali police officer who is now serving, I think, 12 years for that killing. So the community-based work, certainly police, but also with an eye on just the nature of the social relations in Minneapolis. I listened a bit to your earlier speakers, and Seattle reminds me a lot of Minneapolis in the sense that for, I would say, the white middle all the way up to the white elite, it really is quite a good place to live. You know, great schools, parks, access to good housing. Of course, the other side of that equation is the dispossession of the Black and Brown and Indigenous communities here. And that, from my perspective, started with the establishment of a white settler colonial space when Minnesota was established as a state. And that legacy, that through line has continued into the present moment. And of course, the police have had a very instrumental role in maintaining that system to protect property, to protect the comfort zone of white citizens and those who bear the brunt of the violence, of course, or the Black and Brown and other communities. So there certainly is quite a bit of continuity. I will say the Floyd uprising, just the sheer brutality of it indicated a sort of a different timbre, that these were longstanding grievances by the Black community, but it was just the sheer arrogance of that was just basically the last straw in a lot of ways. And I think the underpinnings of that were already there. We had certainly been working on the organizations I'm most connected with, Black Visions and Reclaim the Block, taking money out of policing.
Yeah.
But it was that light to the fire that has really moved the conversation. So it's distinct in that way. I haven't, there have been a couple of uprisings, one before I arrived in the Twin Cities back in '67, around the time that Detroit went up in flames for some of the same reasons, the deeply rooted white supremacist space here and where Black people found themselves. So in accord with the uprisings that were going on all over this country, and certainly in the wake of the assassination of Dr. King. But this is we're in a different context to some extent. We're also dealing with a crisis or multiple crises in the system per se, and I'm sure others will get into this. But just as across the country, a disproportionality of deaths and the acquiring of COVID-19 rests heavily on the Black community. So and unemployment was always bad, bad education, bad schools. You just go down that misery list, and it was a perfect storm that catalyzed it. And a lot more to say about that, but I hope that sort of gets the conversation going.
Yes, it definitely does, Rose. Thank you for that, for offering that up. And I wanted to pivot over to either Haley or Ash to kind of follow up on that, what Rose mentioned, some of these contextualizations around, right, these cities that have a veneer of upward mobility is possible, but we know that that's not the case. I know particularly in places, North Carolina, we've seen the surges in COVID cases. Charlotte, seen surges in homelessness. Is the capital of the South, right? The role of capitalism. We've got New York, we've got Wall Street, right? So the role of capitalism and how it is playing out in disproportionately exacerbating all of these wealth, economic, education gaps that have existed. So either Asher or Haley, either one, you'd like to speak to how all these things are also impacting the work that you're doing in your respective places, but also what are some of the ways that y'all are addressing the immediate needs as well as the uprising as well.
Thank you so much, Holden. Haley, do you mind if I go?
You should go right ahead. That gives me a second to plug in my
Yes.
computer.
Yes, Rose, I really appreciate everything that you just said. And I also appreciate you naming that kind of like what I call the illusion of inclusion. I was twinkling my fingers because that is so true, especially for the region that I live in, which is Charlotte, North Carolina right now. We have this kind of myth of the New South that is supposed to cloak the entire region. It says that people are upwardly mobile here. It says that Black people and white people get along. It says that the police don't fuck people up here. And we know that all of those things are so not true. So for the last 30 days, Charlotte Uprising and Charlotte has both been instrumental in the Floyd uprising around like how we are doing direct action here. But also we're really proud of the jail support kind of infrastructure that we built in 2016 after the police killed Keith Lamont Scott here. And then we reinvigorated that shit 30 days ago when people in our communities were getting arrested for protesting specifically. While we haven't had any protesters over the last like 2 weeks be arrested, we have seen our jail support be threatened. And so what I mean by jail support, y'all, is outside of the jail, we have a presence of anywhere from 5 to 50 people at a time. For the last 30 days, we've been out there 24 hours, 7 days a week consecutively, giving people rides home, temporary housing, PPE, right? Because we're still in a global pandemic, money, clothes, anything that they like need connections to, we've got it at jail support. And as y'all can imagine, right, being in a global pandemic, there's a lot of folks who are also kind of displaced and misplaced by the city who engage in what we're doing at jail support as well. One of the observations that we made yesterday is that out of our volunteers, many of them are white, and then the ones who are not white and who are not organizers are Black houseless people who live in Charlotte. One of the things that we've been able to do with raising over $300,000 in less than a month was both bail people out of jail, but also to support the homeless and houseless folks who show up to do the jail support every single day. We believe that if you're doing like this kind of work, you yourself shouldn't have to worry about finding housing. But of course, what we're realizing with doing jail support for the last 30 days consecutively is like, we were very clear on how the city was failing us. And now that we're in a global pandemic, right, like we can even see more saliently the ways in which the state and the city has no place in like serving the people right now and no interest, right? We are seeing people get released without masks. When they arrest protesters, they often take their masks away, citing that they're worried about the protesters contaminating the detention facility, which is really wild because we know that cases of COVID are so prevalent inside of Charlotte Mecklenburg, both Jail Central and Jail North, I'm going to add. And so I just really appreciate that context, Rose. I also want to name that us in Charlotte, like we're looking at exactly what's happening in where you live, Haley, and where you live, Rose. We are excited and having a hard time conceptualizing, like, what does it mean to live in a city that doesn't have the police or where the police have been disbanded or defunded, right? I'm out there every day at jail support being like, it's about to be like Minneapolis in this bitch, defunded and disbanded. And I'm very proud to say that. And I'm a little like, what does it look like to be a Black trans person like living in Minneapolis right now as this is happening? I'm connected to folks who do Black Visions Collective work. So I've been closely following that. And Rose, you just gave me a lot more context to that work, and I appreciate you. I appreciate what's happening across the Southeast region. We're tired of the South getting forgotten about and just kind of shat on in general in terms of organizing, because we believe that what we're doing here is truly revolutionary and truly different than any other way or any other place, right? Naming the conditions that we have been fighting for years and years, like even before the killing of Keith Lamont Scott. And then the last thing I want to name, right, is One of the things that the Floyd uprising has really helped us to make prevalent is the ways in which protesters are actually either killed or brutalized during this work. Right? Like, we've been doing this work since before 2016. And, folks want to pay attention to the ways in which the state is criminalizing protesting and speaking out. And so we're trying to do everything that we can to keep people committed to abolitionist values. We're trying to keep people mindful that, like, our orientation is towards people who are being released in Charlotte. And then we want to, follow the ways of the way that folks are doing things in places like Minneapolis. And we're excited. I'll leave that for now. And I'm excited to hear what you have to say, Haley.
Thanks, Ash.
Yes, thank you both so much. I appreciate especially what you just said, Ash, about the South leading the way. I think that actually we have a lot to learn and a long way to go in terms of where things are in New York and in other cities in the North. Actually, if anything, this, what's happening in Minneapolis, what's happening elsewhere is really an inspiration and a model for where we want to get, in the future. But that said, I am really, truly inspired and impressed by how much this movement has shifted consciousness of people all over the country, all over the world in a matter of weeks. When I became involved in the Black Lives Matter movement in 2014 in New York, I mean, the difference between the kinds of demands that people were raising and the difference in the level of solidarity is so stark. The demands around that time to defund the police were pretty much limited to radical pockets of the left and of Black anti-racists. To see that become almost a mainstream demand and to see it linked to a discussion about abolition for the first time on a mainstream level is really remarkable. I was involved in organizing a march around the demand to defund NYPD on Monday, and we got about 50 different coalition partners together to work with us, us being the Democratic Socialists of America, to basically try to push forward some kind of link to the occupation that's happening in front of City Hall, to demand that they divest $1 billion from the police or more. And having, I believe, something like 3,000 to 5,000 people come out for this massive militant march was really inspiring. There's also just the fact that these movements have been much more multiracial, that they've been Black-led, and they've been led in particular by Black youth. In this city, it's been less by organizations that exist already and much more by people who are brand new to this movement or who grew up in the shadow of the movements that came before, watching people protesting in the streets, the Gen Zers who are really very much won to an abolitionist mindset in a way that I think is more intuitive than the generations that came before. And so seeing all of that happened in this context has really given me a lot of hope for what we're able to do next. And I think what we need to do is get to a point where we have the kind of organization that exists in other parts of the country so that people who have come into this movement are then able to figure out what are our next steps and how do we continue to move forward from here.
Haley, thank you for elevating this this piece around organization and the need for organization. I think that has came across as critiques that have existed, right, in our very recent past around protest and uprising that has happened. This question around organization, how are people building organization? How are people building long-term power towards self-governance? So, and Rose, I know you mentioned the work of Black Visions Collective, and they've been doing some dynamic work. But wondering if there are other examples that folks have of folks who are really in this work of building organization and building towards long-term power.
Yeah, actually, I'm a member of an organization that puts at the center of its charge the building of strategy and strategist. That's Left Roots, which is akin to has, I know, coalition with DSA and other social movement organizations. But I think that is so absolutely core to what this moment demands. That the fire has been lit, but where are we going to take that fire? Under what conditions? By whom and with whom? And that's a very serious proposition. Organizing, building organization, but to what end? And I do want to take a moment, and you might return to this, Holden, about the appearance of what defunding is and the reality of how it has been articulated. And I'm speaking directly to the dynamic going on in Minneapolis right now, but more to the point. And I remember the wisdom of Kwame Ture when he said, organize, organize, organize. That's Stokely Carmichael. Y'all might not even know either of those names. I hope you do. But I mean, that's the core piece. And you know, we in this country, the left has many ills, and it's weak. But one of the lessons that we have to take to heart is this unity notion that's being articulated by People Strike, being as sharp politically and strategically as we can, and to build organizations that can take this work forward. I think it can be done. Oftentimes it hasn't been done well, but this is, you know, the fire this time. So let's see what we can do.
Yes, thank you for that, Rose. Other folks want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll speak briefly because I truly agree with that. In fact, I really appreciate People Strike for putting this forum together, and I hope some of us who are in touch for the first time can continue to be in touch, because we're going to have to develop those links nationally if this is to be successful, I think. And I think I want to speak to sort of some of the elements that I think need to come into play. You know, maybe this is a question for later as well, but I appreciated the speakers before talking about the idea of a strike, and also the question of where does labor fit into all of this. And in New York in particular, there have been some really inspiring examples of, I think, how we can connect this movement against racism to a movement against austerity, and the fact that those two things have to be fundamentally linked. So right now we're up against the fact that New York City just passed a budget which they are trying to spin as a victory. The fact that they have to spin it is a sign that the movement is putting pressure on those in power. But the fact of the matter is the details of this are not a real defunding of the NYPD. We were hoping that they would actually defund the police, and the actual bill as is written instead transfers money from the NYPD to school resource officers, meaning more cops in schools that are, I know it's really disgusting, who are already over policed, particularly in Black and brown neighborhoods. We're of course one of the most segregated school systems in the country. And so that is no solution. The good news is we have a movement that is open enough and aware enough of students, of teachers, of parents, and of activists who are not having the wool pulled over their eyes. I don't think anyone is satisfied with this budget as it stands. And so the question next is, where does the social power actually lie for us to get the city to do something that it doesn't want to do? And the fact that the teachers' unions, on the one hand, the UFT in particular, has been reluctant to challenge the mayor, Bill de Blasio, despite him having been one of the biggest obstacles in this period to us actually finally defunding the police, which is really the bare minimum of what needs to be done. The teachers have led the way in both the rank and file caucuses, like Movement of Rank and File Educators, both to get the schools to close when they were continuing to remain open despite the pandemic, and leaving people even more vulnerable, especially considering that in places like the Bronx, we have some of the highest rates of COVID. Of course, the predominantly Black neighborhoods are bearing the brunt of all of this. But also teachers leading the way in terms of the efforts to get the cops out of schools in the first place. So I think the more we can develop those links, the more that we'll actually be in a position to have a very strong movement that has its fingers on where the economy is and where we're able to put the most pressure on the system by withholding our labor. We're still a long way from that, but I think because of the dynamics between the pandemic and the uprising, so much more in terms of what people can do is on the table. And so we're going to have to figure that out. But I'm, again, very, very excited to see where that happens.
Could I do a quick response to Haley's last points, Holden?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, actually, one of the wins in the Minneapolis uprising has been the breaking of contracts by the Minneapolis public school system with so-called school resource officers, the police, and St. Paul, which is a sister city, just recently broke its contract with its police department. So school resource officers should be removed and will be under this new agreement. I would also say that there is a push to ensure that ethnic studies, Black, Brown, Indigenous studies are pulled into the school curriculum and into the overall educational demands in the state of Minnesota. That particular demand is an old one, but this uprising, of course, has made things possible that perhaps weren't possible before. It seems like a reform, but it is rooted in decolonizing both the school system and the students we teach. So I don't know if we're going to have time to get into the complexities of what it means to be defunded, but it can mean a lot of things, and it can be an appropriated demand without legs. But ours is an abolitionist demand that's tied to what others people have said about really upending where resources go, imagining a world without police where both the planet and the people are well sustained. So I'll stop there.
Yes, that is so rich, that complexity that we have to dig into around when we say defund. What are we truly saying? Because of the ways in which we know that oftentimes our language will get co-opted and then utilized against us, right? In ways that we did not conceive. So how do we just go ahead and think ahead and truly build out that education? And I want to dive into that more, but I also know that Ash will have to leave us in a little bit, and so
okay.
So I want to be able to elevate something that is happening right now in North Carolina that ties into both labor, environmental, racial justice around these chicken packing plants in North Carolina that have shown to have these high surges of COVID in their plants. They've been covering it up. I'm wondering if you would like to speak to any of these connections that we're seeing in North Carolina and around environmental justice work and the effects of COVID and what this all means in this moment for North Carolina for the type of work that can happen.
Yes, Holden, thank you so much for that. One of the things that I saw around a month ago was these plants that you name having big chicken sales, letting folks know that they could get 40 pounds of chicken for $20. And I know, being in rural North Carolina, my aunties, my cousins, my people were showing up. My mom's church in Fayetteville, North Carolina had a giveaway, they was giving the chicken away. And I mean, other folks, not just me, in the community, drew that positive correlation between these plants with COVID with high cases of COVID, and then the giving away of chicken or meats at a very low price to poor people, right? 40 pounds of chicken can feed a family well through the end of the year. I understand why and how people found themselves waiting for that food. And one of the things that we did was just try to let people try to connect those dots, try to let people know that we thought it was kind of weird and kind of funky, right? That these same plants, these chicken plants that were both laying people off, furloughing people, finding themselves with high cases of COVID, they were also giving chicken away. And some people were able to make those connections in our community. And some people still had to get their 40 pounds of chicken for $20. One of the things that we are trying to do, right, is remind people that even as we're fighting for these and fighting against these injustices in our community, that we're still in a global pandemic. We do our best to have masks and PPE, hand sanitizer at all of the actions that we have, all of the things that we gather at, right? At jail support, we try to social distance. We try to wear our gloves and masks. We make sure that only certain people are handling the food, things like that. We're talking about the fact that we have so many clothes donations and how we need to like figure out a way to wash the clothes. But also people in our community, right? They don't have access to showers or hand washing stations. We actually learned from Durham, North Carolina, how to build those. And so we'll be building them at our jail support this week. But we are really, I guess we're realizing like for the last 3 months, right? It's been very clear around how the state has failed us around COVID specifically and around healthcare. And we are doing our best to make those connections for folks in our community around how the state fails us around healthcare, but also in general care, but also safety. And we are using this time to like ask ourselves and our community, like, if there's going to be a state, which I'm not sure there should be one, what ought they provide, right? What ought they provide? Like, do we want them to keep us safe? Like, do we think they can? Like, I don't think they can. But when it comes down to other services, like jail support is actually giving us the ability to think about like, what do we think about how the state has tried to support people who are being released? Where have they failed and where can we show up? We hear that the city and the county manager wants to meet with our jail support. They're upset because we're across the street from the jail. They're upset that there are always a lot of people hanging out, that we allow dogs, that we allow people who are homeless and houseless to like hang out with us all day. They call it raggedy. They try to drag it any way they can. And we are letting them know that we are there to stay. And if they want to, they can do us an actual favor, which might look like giving us something better than what we've been able to give ourselves. Like, we already got a booth. We already have people donating to our bail fund. We already have people donating those supplies that we're redistributing every single day. And so we're taking this time to actually to keep going, right? But to ask ourselves, like, if there's going to be a state, what ought they provide? And can we do it better? And can people in our community do it better? And can we redistribute some of the resources to support the community for the folks who have already been keeping us safe, keeping us fed, housed, and those kinds of things? And so this moment is giving us a lot, right? We're asking about whether we'll consider like being a 501c3. And we've been able to do so much work, like so much radical work without that distinction. We want to keep it going. And so we're still trying to figure things out. We're having meetings with everybody except for the cops. And we're still, we're trying.
Yeah.
Check.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all that you offered up, Ash, for the work that's happening in Charlotte and the ways in which, y'all are really showing up in radical ways to redefine labor, redefine access, redefine safety, right? It's part of this Black liberatory legacy, right? That you're continuing in the spirit of doing. So thank you so much for that work. And I know you have to go, but yeah, just once again, thank you for being with us.
It's been a pleasure. Thank y'all. I'm sorry I have therapy and I cannot miss another week.
Take care of you, boo. I see you.
Understood.
Yeah, goodness, what a discussion. Wow.
And Firoze, do we have time for maybe a little bit more conversation, or are we needing to?
Come on, twist my arm. I mean,
How much are we talking about?
I just had a particular question around Haley, what you elevated, particular piece around austerity and budgets, like this protest around particularly like connecting austerity has been something that I've seen in so many other places other than the U.S. in these kind of big, really like pivotal ways that more and more people are having conversations around budgets, money, and spending. I was wanting to know if either one of y'all had more to offer up on the kind of really critical ways that we can really insert resource redistributing and shifting our resources and reimagining resource allocation in this moment in time.
Go for it, Haley. I'll follow.
Sure, thank you. I think that's incredibly important. To build on what Ash was saying, I think on the one hand, there's been this incredibly inspiring move since the pandemic that has really allowed us to think through what is it that this country, which is the wealthiest country in the world, simply does not provide for its people. I mean, we don't have a healthcare system. We have a for-profit system that doesn't actually provide care to the vast majority of people in this country. In New York alone, we have 250,000 vacant houses, and yet we have a homeless crisis. And then we have the crises of racism, of immigration, of all kinds of things that could be provided for, and yet we're always told there's no money. And it's astounding to see how quickly, for instance, they're able to get the money to clean up some of the monuments in Washington Square Park that have been damaged by protesters because they are the monuments to George Washington and to Columbus. Within hours of people attempting to put graffiti on them for Black lives, or to mobilize the police who are armed to the teeth. They're able to respond to us when we protest to demand things that we need, but they aren't able to respond to a global pandemic. It's just clear what the priorities of that system are. And I think that that's more on display beyond those of us who've been part of these movements for everyone to see. I mean, we are really exposed in the way that there is just really no infrastructure there for us. And that's been by design. It's part of why, it's the other side of why the police exist in the first place. In other words, you can't talk about austerity without oppressing the populations that are most likely to resist. And as we know, every time, because of how central racism is to propping up this system, every time Black struggle goes into motion, it raises questions about the entire society. And so it's part of why we are the most oppressed. And it's part of why this movement is rising up to such radical demands. I think it's interesting what you said too about other countries, Holden, having these connections made more readily. I think that we're having a much more class conscious movement in this country for the first time. There's a lot of different elements to the radicalization that we're seeing. And I think it's clear that we can't have a successful movement against either racism or capitalism unless we're actually talking about the ways that those two are fundamentally intertwined. So what I think in terms of where we go from here, our demands around defund, for it to really be radical, for the mutual aid efforts that people have put forward to be radical, on the one hand, they're showing that ordinary people can run society, that we run it better than the people who are mismanaging and causing this crisis. On the other hand, we need to connect our demands today with the demand to tax the rich, because there are actually people in the society who have those resources in a way that actually our mutual aid, until we actually wrest those resources for ourselves, are never going to be able to provide on the scale that's necessary. And again, those resources exist. I think we actually have to show and push at the same time what's possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would extend Haley's remarks in this way. And I would say, whatever is said about the Floyd rebellion, we must keep in mind that Minneapolis is a capitalist city. And that means certain kinds of things. And oftentimes that's eluded from the conversation on why there is this deep interconnection, interrelationality between racism and capitalism. But we have some of the major corporations in the country situated in Minneapolis, Minnesota. There's a very interesting kind of class divide with the small elite sector, and we can go internationally with this. I would call it more of a comprador sector that has in fact done quite well. These are Black professionals, elites to some extent, but not the owners of capital. And then we have this massive, quote, problem of the majority of Black and brown people living in immiseration. As you were saying, Haley, that doesn't add up. But in a way, it does. It does what the society is set out to do. I mean, if we have a society that's built on profit and expropriation, and when you become expendable, mass incarceration, that tells us all we need to know about what the demand is. But it's also a society with guns and violence and occupation, and being very clear. And I know both of us have seen what real bullets and rubber bullets can do with, all of us have seen with protest. So really getting a clear sense of the nature of this white supremacist, heteropatriarchal capitalist order, and how that always is the underpinning those people who are most harmed. And in this society, it's always been exceedingly racialized through anti-Blackness, have always risen up. I can't think of an exception to that. And this time, the emperor certainly has no clothes in terms of the deaths, the lack of hospitalization available for folk. People are hungry. We had a situation of mutual aid where a hotel was opened up in Minneapolis. Those occupants, homeless and houseless, were kicked out. And now they're in a tent city in one of the parks here. So the contradictions are real and deep, and won't be resolved on that revolutionary road to a different society. Deep reform, defunding is a piece of it, but I like to talk about reforms that lead to things that we can do tomorrow that we weren't able to do today. And I think I'm just elated that the vision that I've heard on this call and by the speakers speak to that. But we got a way to go, and it's a hard and rocky road. So, yeah.
Indeed, Rose, indeed. Yeah, definitely hearing you in that. And I think one of the beautiful pieces is that we have these networks that are forming. We're able to communicate and connect in ways like never before, right? Which means that we're able to really build and mobilize and build our knowledge and awareness even faster in this critical time. So thank you so much, Rose, for being on today. Thank you so much, Haley, for your time. It's been a wonderful conversation. Yes, and please keep us up to date with all that is happening with the work you're up to.
We will. Thank you all both.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye. How do we?
Okay, well done, Holden. That was a great session. Thank you so much for doing that. We're now coming to the end of part one broadcast. And because there are restrictions as to the length of any video streaming, we're going to close this session, and then we will go back to well, let me just get this right. Yes, we'll be moving on to the following place, YouTube link, as well as, but you can stay on at People Strike website. But if you're watching on YouTube or elsewhere, this is the link that we will be moving to. So I'd like to say thank you to all the participants here. We have Clarence and Saki here, but you are joining part one, and we're about to close part one. So we'll move over to part two, and we'll start again. So this is Firoze Manji closing for this session, and I will open up part two. Holden, thank you so much for all your help. You were just brilliant.
Yes, it was a wonderful conversation. Great guests to have to talk about this critical moment.
Yeah. So very good. You take care.
Rose, take care.
Okay, we'll be together soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, just to remind you, we've come to the end of our first part of our broadcasting, but we will be continuing over at the link that I've shown on the screen now. And I hope you will join us for many, many more really interesting discussions. So for the moment, I say goodbye and see you there in a moment.